My name is Helena and I am 42 years old. I had just walked into a courthouse to end a marriage that had eaten my bones, and my husband smiled at the judge while bragging he would live off everything I owned. The moment he laughed, something inside me cracked. They all thought I was the weak wife with a soft heart and too many tears, but they had no idea what I carried in my bag that morning. I kept my face still, even when my hands trembled. One envelope. One secret. One last chance to turn everything around. Before I continue, tell me your country and the time right now. I was born into a house that never wanted me. The walls knew it before I did. They were lined with photographs of my brother, his perfect smile, his awards, his birthdays celebrated with chandeliers and guests, while I was a shadow somewhere at the edge of every frame, half visible, half tolerated. Even as a child, I could feel the imbalance, though I couldn't name it. Daniel was the pride of the family, my father's heir, my mother's son. I was the daughter they forgot to plan for, the one they clothed in hand-me-downs and silenced at dinner when my opinions accidentally slipped out. They never raised their voices. That's what made it worse. My parents' cruelty came in quiet tones, with porcelain smiles and perfumed distance. My mother would call my name softly when there were dishes to wash or errands to run, but she never called me when guests arrived. "You look tired, dear," she'd say, adjusting her pearls. "Why don't you stay upstairs? Daniel's friends don't need distractions." Distractions. That's what I was, a presence to be managed, not a person to be loved. Our house smelled of polished wood and control. My father's study was locked to everyone except Daniel. I used to press my ear against the door, listening to their voices hum like a secret world I wasn't born to enter. The few times I dared to peek in, my father would raise an eyebrow and say, "This isn't for you, Helena. Go help your mother." By the time I was 12, I understood the hierarchy perfectly. My brother was being groomed to inherit everything, the vineyards, the estate, the family company that bore our last name in gold letters. I was being trained to be quiet, obedient, grateful for leftovers. One Christmas, I received a small box from my parents. Inside was a used wristwatch, Daniel's old one, the strap frayed, the glass scratched. He got a car that year. I thanked them anyway, because disappointment was a luxury I wasn't allowed. My father smiled faintly and said, "That's a good girl. Always humble." It was never about gifts. It was about worth. My childhood was a slow education in invisibility. I learned that silence could protect me, that if I stayed out of sight, the storm would pass over my head. My mother often sighed, "Helena, you're too sensitive," whenever I flinched at her words. Sensitivity became my curse word. It meant I noticed. It meant I remembered. But I noticed everything. The way my mother's eyes softened only for Daniel. The way my father's tone changed when he said son. The way money flowed in one direction, toward him. Once, I overheard my mother talking to a neighbor on the veranda. "Of course, Daniel will inherit the company. He's his father's reflection." "Helena? Oh, she'll marry well, I'm sure." A woman's future isn't built on paperwork, it's built on finding someone who can provide. Her words were gentle, but they bruised. That night, lying in bed, I whispered a promise into the darkness, "One day, I'll provide for myself. And when I do, you won't even see it coming." I was 17 when the first real fracture appeared in our polished family portrait. My father had been sick for weeks, and whispers about documents began circling the house. One evening, I walked past his study and heard him speaking in hushed tones to Daniel. "You'll need to take over sooner than expected," my father said. "Everything will be transferred into your name. The estate, the company, the accounts. Your sister will be comfortable, she doesn't need to know the details." Daniel chuckled, his voice smug. "Don't worry, Dad. I'll make sure she has enough to stay quiet." They laughed together. That laugh stayed in my bones for years. I pressed my palm against the wall, my throat burning. My future, whatever fragments of it existed, was being decided without me in the next room. The words, "She doesn't need to know," carved something cold into my chest. I wasn't angry yet. I was numb. The kind of numbness that grows roots. When my mother entered later, her perfume filled the hall. She saw me standing near the door and froze. "Helena, you shouldn't be wandering around. Go to bed." "What were they talking about?" I asked quietly. Her smile was practiced, sugar-coated. "Adult matters. Don't let your imagination run wild, dear. It only causes drama." Drama. That word again, like sensitivity's cruel twin. She took my hand, squeezed it too tightly, and added, "It's better for everyone if you focus on your own path. Daniel has responsibilities. You'll have a husband one day. That's balance." I didn't sleep that night. I stared at the ceiling until dawn, memorizing the shadows. Somewhere between midnight and morning, I realized something terrifying and liberating. I was not part of their story. I was an accessory to their legacy. From that moment, my silence wasn't submission, it was observation. I began to collect moments the way other girls collected jewelry. Every lie, every whisper, every favor they gave Daniel became an entry in the private archive of my mind. One day, I thought, I will need these. I didn't know when. I didn't know how. But I knew the truth always waits for its moment. Then, one morning not long after, a letter arrived. Thick envelope, cream paper, my father's initials embossed in gold. My mother intercepted it before I could reach the door. "What's that?" I asked. "Nothing for you," she said, too quickly. She tucked it under her shawl, her voice suddenly clipped. "Go wash up for breakfast." But I saw it. The edge of my name written in his handwriting. Helena M. My chest tightened. I wanted to ask again, but her eyes were sharp, warning me to stay silent. That letter vanished. I never saw it again. My father died 6 months later, and the family lawyer said there was no record of any correspondence addressed to me. Yet I know what I saw. The house that never wanted me had buried one more secret in its walls. And as they buried my father in the family cemetery, Daniel stood tall beside the casket, already wearing the expression of an heir. Everyone called it a tragedy. I called it a rehearsal. Because even then, before betrayal had taken full shape, I could sense it forming like a storm behind the horizon, waiting for the day it would strike. And when it did, I promised myself, I would not be the girl on the staircase again. I would be the one holding the matches when their empire caught fire. The next morning, another letter arrived, one my mother couldn't hide this time, and when I tore it open, the first line made my blood run cold. The letter that arrived the next morning wasn't from my father, it was from his lawyer. A single page, coldly worded, informing me that according to Mr. Mercer's final instructions, the estate has been transferred in full to Mr. Daniel Mercer. There was a single line about me at the end, a small annual allowance will be provided at Mr. Daniel's discretion. Discretion. That word made my stomach twist. They had turned my life into my brother's charity project. When I showed the letter to my mother, she merely sighed. "It's fair, Helena. Daniel has the mind for business. You have the heart for peace. Be content with that." Peace. What she meant was obedience. I was 22 and felt like a ghost haunting my own bloodline. The family mansion was no longer mine to live in, it was Daniel's to manage. My mother stayed, content under his roof. I packed a single suitcase, took a bus to the city, and rented a room that smelled of mold and beginning. I told myself I would build a life. I would study, work, earn, and someday make them regret every word they had used to shrink me. But life, at that time, was not kind. It was waiting for me with a test disguised as love. That's when I met Ethan. He appeared during one of my loneliest years, when I was working as a receptionist in a law firm downtown. He was charming in a quiet, deliberate way. He listened, asked questions, remembered my favorite tea. He said I had kind eyes. No one had ever said that to me before. He came from a good family, not wealthy like mine once was, but solid, parents who sent postcards and called every Sunday. He made me feel chosen. When he asked me to marry him a year later, I said yes without hesitation. The wedding was small, intimate, and embarrassingly simple compared to the grand affairs I had grown up around. My mother didn't attend. Danielle sent a curt message, "Congratulations. Don't expect help." I didn't care. For the first time I was free. Or so I thought. The first months were blissful. We rented a small apartment with cracked walls but sunlight that poured in every morning like forgiveness. Ethan said he wanted to start a business. I believed in him, lent him my savings, what little I had. He smiled and said, "You're my partner in everything." But partnership, I learned, can mean different things to different people. Within 2 years, Ethan changed. Subtly at first. Fewer smiles, shorter answers. He started coming home late, smelling faintly of cologne that wasn't mine. When I asked, he said, "Don't be paranoid. You sound like your mother." Those words were poison. He began treating my concern as comedy. When bills piled up, he blamed my emotional energy. When I tried to talk about our future, he called me dramatic. The old echoes of my childhood returned, sensitive, ungrateful, overreacting. One night, I found a receipt in his jacket from a jewelry store. It wasn't my birthday, or any occasion. The engraving on the slip read, "To Claire, my beginning." I felt the floor tilt beneath me. My beginning. That's what he called me once. When I confronted him, he didn't deny it. He just shrugged. "You're too intense, Helena. You suffocate me. Claire understands me. You're comfortable. Comfortable. Like an old chair." I packed a bag, but I didn't have anywhere to go. My family wouldn't take me back. I spent a night on a friend's couch, crying into a blanket that smelled of detergent and pity. 2 weeks later, Ethan filed for separation. Not divorce, separation. He said he needed space to think. The truth was, he had already moved in with her. I tried to focus on work, but the humiliation followed me everywhere. At the law firm, whispers floated through the hallways. Someone even printed a photo of Ethan and Claire at a party and left it on my desk. I tore it apart with shaking hands. The final blow came when he called one evening, not to apologize, but to gloat. "Claire and I are planning to get married next spring," he said. "I wanted you to hear it from me." I couldn't even find the strength to hang up. I just listened to his voice fade into static. I sold the engagement ring to pay rent. I sold my grandmother's bracelet to buy groceries. I learned to survive on noodles and cold resolve. The old lessons of invisibility came back to protect me. But this time, silence didn't feel safe, it felt like surrender. I started keeping a journal, writing down every insult, every manipulation, every pattern. I began to recognize the type of men who feed on quiet women. My father had been one. Danielle had become one. Ethan was their reflection. One night, sitting by the window of my tiny apartment, I looked at my reflection in the glass and said aloud, "No more." It wasn't loud, but it was final. The next morning, I found a small legal notice slipped under my door. It was from Ethan's lawyer, informing me that he had filed for full control of our shared account, claiming I had contributed nothing financially. I laughed. A dry, bitter laugh that scraped my throat. I had funded his business, every cent of my savings, and now he wanted me erased from even that story. I went to the bank, only to find the account emptied. He had taken it all. That afternoon, I went to his office building. I remember standing outside, watching through the glass as he walked out with Claire, his hand on her waist, his laughter bright. He saw me and looked straight through me, as if I were a stranger. Something inside me cracked, not from heartbreak this time, but from understanding. This wasn't just betrayal. It was inheritance, of cruelty, of entitlement, of men who believed women like me existed to be quiet, to give, to endure. I walked home under a gray sky, my shoes soaked from the rain. When I reached my door, there was an envelope taped to it, thick, cream-colored, with a name printed neatly in the corner. It was from my old law firm senior partner. Inside, a single line was written. Helena, come see me tomorrow. There's something I think you should know about Ethan's business. My pulse quickened. I didn't know it yet, but that envelope was the first crack of lightning before the storm that would burn everything down. When I met the senior partner the next day, he slid a document across the table, and the name on it made my heart stop cold. The next morning, I went to the firm early. The hallway smelled of coffee and toner, the low hum of printers masking my heartbeat. I hadn't slept. The letter from the senior partner, Mr. Harlan, sat folded in my bag, its ink already smudged from my palms. He was waiting in his glass-walled office, looking tired but kind. When he saw me, he gestured to the seat across from him. Helena, he said gently, I've known you since you started here. I wish I didn't have to show you this. He slid a manila folder toward me. My fingers trembled as I opened it. Inside were copies of financial records, loan applications, invoices, and transfers, all signed by Ethan Mercer. But at the bottom of one form, the co-signer's name hit me like a slap. Daniel Mercer. My brother. For a moment, the air left the room. Your husband's business, Mr. Harlan said, watching my expression, was partially funded through an investment arranged by your brother. It seems, the two of them were acquainted long before you married Ethan. I couldn't breathe. My husband and my brother, partners behind my back. The two men who had defined my failures had collaborated, quietly, while I stood between them like a fool. They used my name, I whispered. My name's on these documents as a reference. They made it look like I vouched for them. Mr. Harlan nodded grimly. Yes. I'm afraid so. That's why the tax notice came to you last month. He pushed another paper forward, an official letter from the Revenue Office. Unpaid business taxes, overdue by 8 months. Amount owed, $46,000. My name was listed as responsible party. I felt a wave of nausea. He can't do that. I'm afraid he already has, Harlan said. Legally, you're still married. Unless you challenge the records in court, you're liable for the debt. I don't remember leaving his office. I only remember standing outside in the freezing air, the city noises dissolving into static. Somewhere, a street musician played a violin that sounded like heartbreak. By the time I reached my apartment, the shock had curdled into something darker, clarity. My husband and my brother had used me, just like my parents had trained me to accept. Every kindness was a calculation. Every promise, a script. That night, I wrote Ethan's name and Daniel's name side by side on a piece of paper, drew a single line between them, and wrote beneath it, same blood. Same betrayal. But I didn't burn the paper. I folded it, slipped it into a box with my father's old photographs, and whispered, you will both regret this. Months passed. I moved through my days like a ghost with a schedule, work, sleep, survive. Ethan and Claire were married by spring. My brother's name appeared in business news, praised for expanding family ventures. My mother called once, briefly, to ask if I was over it yet. I said yes. But what I didn't tell her was that something had shifted in me. I had begun saving quietly. A little from every paycheck, tucked into a private account under a different name. I took evening classes in accounting, then in contract law. I learned to read the fine print, the kind men like my husband and brother relied on women to ignore. It was during one of those classes that I met Adrian. He wasn't loud or charming like Ethan had been. He was steady, thoughtful, with eyes that seemed to see through my defenses but never tried to break them. He was a corporate consultant, well off but grounded. When he asked me out, I hesitated. My trust was a locked vault. But something about his patience disarmed me. We talked for hours over coffee, not about love or fate, but about the quiet satisfaction of rebuilding yourself after ruin. He never pitted me. He listened. Within a year, I married him. My second wedding was the opposite of my first, no flowers, no guests, no fragile dreams. Just a courthouse, 2 signatures, and a quiet promise, no lies. For a while, it felt like peace. Adrian was kind, respectful, and utterly uninterested in my past. We lived in a modest but beautiful home, and for the first time in years, I slept without fear. Then, slowly, wealth began to wrap around us like silk. Adrian's business flourished. Investments multiplied. He bought properties, cars, even a vineyard, by coincidence, not far from my family's. I told him I didn't want to visit the region, that it carried ghosts. He just smiled and said, "Then let's make new memories there." He meant it. And for a while, I believed we were untouchable. But power changes people, especially men who once admired your strength but later resent needing it. It started subtly. A remark here, a distance there. "You wouldn't understand the details," he'd say when I asked about finances. "You've been through too much. Let me handle this." I didn't argue. I had learned to watch first. Then came the dinner at his company's gala. Adrian stood on stage, thanking his team, his investors, and then, smiling toward me, he said, "And of course, my wife, who trusts me enough never to interfere." Laughter rippled through the room. My throat burned. The phrase "never to interfere" followed me home. The next week, he began coming home late. His phone turned face down on the table. He stopped asking me about my day. The silence between us stretched into something I recognized too well. One night, I woke up and found him in his study, whispering into his phone. His voice was low, intimate. When I asked who it was, he said, "Work call." But when he left for a trip 2 days later, I checked the phone records. The number belonged to a woman named Lena, an associate he'd met in Milan. The betrayal didn't shock me, it confirmed me. Still, I stayed quiet. I needed proof. I had learned that emotion is dismissed but evidence speaks. Weeks passed. His absences grew longer. My patience became strategy. I started recording calls, saving receipts, copying emails. Then one evening, while clearing his desk, I found a folder labeled Estate Transition Plan. Inside were drafts of property transfers, insurance changes, and, buried among them, a clause proposing that, in the event of divorce, Adrian Mercer would retain all assets as sole proprietor. My signature was already forged at the bottom. I felt the world tilt, but I didn't scream. I just sat there, staring at the ink. History was repeating itself, but this time I wasn't a powerless girl overhearing whispers. I was the woman holding the proof. I closed the folder slowly, placed it back exactly as I'd found it, and walked to the mirror. For the first time in my life, I smiled at the reflection of a woman they had all underestimated. That night, I slipped an envelope into my bag, a fresh one, blank, empty. I didn't know what it would hold yet, only that it would change everything. The next morning, a call came from a lawyer I didn't recognize. His words were calm but electric. "Mrs. Mercer, it's about the estate. I think you should come in. There's something you need to see, immediately." The lawyer's office smelled of leather and disinfectant, like old power scrubbed clean. I sat in a chair too big for me, my hands tied around the strap of my purse, waiting for the man behind the mahogany desk to speak. He didn't look up immediately, just flipped through the pages of a folder marked Mercer Holdings. When he finally met my eyes, his expression was careful. Professional pity. "Mrs. Mercer," he said, "I'm afraid your husband has made some unilateral financial decisions. Properties have been transferred, liquid assets moved offshore. According to the paperwork, you signed consent." I felt my stomach drop. "That's impossible. I never." He slid a photocopy across the desk. My signature stared back at me, elegant, forged. "He filed these 2 weeks ago," the lawyer continued. He also listed a secondary contact, someone named Lena Hartman. That name hit like déjà vu. The phone calls. The perfume on his shirts. "She's his associate," I said quietly. "She's more than that, isn't she?" The lawyer's eyes softened but stayed silent. He didn't need to confirm it. The truth was written in every document between us. When I left the office, the air outside felt colder than winter. I stood on the sidewalk, blinking at the sunlight, realizing my marriage, my supposed sanctuary, was another fraud. On the drive home, I tried to tell myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe it was business strategy. Maybe the lawyer misunderstood. But when I opened the front door, the scent hit me before the reality did, soft, expensive perfume, lingering in the hallway like trespass. I followed it upstairs, step by deliberate step. The bedroom door was half open. The sheets were undone. And on my dresser, where I always kept a single framed photo from our wedding, sat a new item, a gold hair clip, glittering under the light. It wasn't mine. I don't know how long I stood there, staring. My breath came in shallow bursts, like I was drowning in a room full of air. When Adrian appeared in the doorway, freshly showered, buttoning his shirt, he looked surprised, but not guilty. "You're home early," he said simply. The audacity of his calmness broke something in me. I held up the hair clip. "Whose is this?" He didn't even glance at it. "You're imagining things, Helena." "Imagining?" My voice shook. "Her perfume is on the sheets. The lawyer called me about Lena. Don't lie to me." He exhaled, slow and condescending. "You really should stop talking to lawyers without me. You'll only embarrass yourself." My chest tightened. "So it's true." He shrugged. "You always overreact. I have meetings, travel, stress, you twist everything into betrayal because you can't handle peace." "Peace?" He used the same word my mother had used to keep me silent. I took a step toward him. "You forged my signature. You moved our assets. You brought her here." His eyes hardened, his voice dropping to a whisper that chilled me. "You're lucky to live the life you have. Don't ruin it by pretending you understand business." I laughed then, quietly, bitterly. "You sound just like him." He frowned. "Who?" "My father." He blinked, confused, then shook his head like I'd said something irrelevant. "You're tired, Helena. Take a break. Go to the spa. I'll handle everything." "I'm sure you will," I said. I walked past him, down the stairs, out of the house. My legs felt like they didn't belong to me. I drove aimlessly, ending up at the waterfront, where the air stung with salt. I sat in the car, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. For hours, I stayed there, replaying every conversation, every quiet dismissal, every moment I had chosen silence over confrontation. I had been here before, different faces, same betrayal. When dusk fell, I returned home. He was gone. The house was too clean, too arranged, like he had scrubbed it of my existence. The perfume still lingered, mocking me. I walked into the kitchen, poured a glass of wine, and stared at the marble countertop where he used to leave little notes. "Don't wait up, back late, love you." Lies written in ink that dried too fast. My phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "If you're looking for Adrian, check the Carlton Hotel. Room 509. No name. No explanation." My body moved before my mind caught up. Within 20 minutes, I was in the hotel lobby, heart pounding, every instinct screaming that I should turn around. But I couldn't. Not this time. The elevator ride felt endless. My reflection in the mirrored walls looked like someone else, someone sharper, older, almost dangerous. I stopped at room 509. The door was slightly ajar. Inside, I saw them. Adrian's jacket on the floor. Her laugh. His hands. My marriage dissolving in soft candlelight and deceit. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just stood there, invisible again, the ghost I had been trained to become. Then I turned and walked away, each step heavier than the last. Outside, the city lights blurred through my tears. I found a bench near the fountain, sat down, and let the night swallow me. My wedding ring felt like a shackle, I pulled it off, dropped it into the water, and watched it vanish under the reflection of street lamps. For the first time, I didn't feel sorrow. I felt something sharper, purpose. I stayed there until the sky turned gray, until the cold sank into my bones. I knew, even as I trembled, that this was not the end of my story. It was the ignition. Because betrayal, I realized, isn't destruction, it's revelation. It shows you who everyone really is, including yourself. And that night, I learned who I was, the woman who would no longer beg to be loved. The woman who would make them pay. The next morning, I returned home to find my suitcase packed and a note on the table in Adrian's handwriting. Don't contact me. I've filed for divorce. Beneath it lay a single envelope, my name written in her handwriting. The envelope on the table was white, perfumed, and sealed with a tiny gold sticker shaped like a heart. I didn't have to open it to know who it was from. I tore it anyway. Inside was a single note, written in neat cursive. I'm sorry you had to see us that way. I never meant to hurt you, but sometimes people belong to the wrong stories. I hope you find peace. Lena. Peace. Again that cursed word. Always offered by those who stole mine. The paper shook in my hands, not because of sadness, but because of humiliation. That word burned hotter than grief. Humiliation is the quiet death no one buries you for. I sank to the floor, my back against the kitchen cabinets, the cold tiles pressing through my spine. Around me, everything looked the same, the fruit bowl, the framed photos, the crystal vase, but suddenly, I saw them differently. Props in a play that had already ended. Adrian didn't even have the courage to face me. He had packed my life into a single suitcase, as if love could be folded, zipped, and carried away. For a long time, I couldn't move. I just sat there, counting my breaths, my fingers clutching the edge of the letter like a weapon I couldn't use. Then my phone rang. It was my mother. I heard about the divorce, she said, her tone too casual, as if she were discussing weather. What happened this time, Helena? This time? My voice cracked. Well, she sighed, you've always been difficult. Maybe if you learned to be more accommodating. I hung up before she could finish. I couldn't listen to another sermon from the woman who had taught me to kneel when I should have stood. The next days passed like scenes from a nightmare that refused to end. I went to the firm to resign, unable to face the whispers. My colleagues avoided eye contact, their pity cutting deeper than judgment. Someone had clearly spread the story, Adrian's version, no doubt. Helena? My supervisor stopped me in the hallway, her expression strained. You should take some time. People talk, but it'll fade. He's moved on quickly, that's all. Moved on. That phrase floated like acid in my mind. At lunch, I overheard two paralegals whispering. She went to the hotel, you know. Walked right in on them. No way. That's tragic. Apparently, she begged him to come home. Pathetic, right? I stood there, frozen, holding my tray. They didn't notice me until I set it down too hard, the clang echoing through the room. Silence fell. I left before I said something I'd regret. But that word, pathetic, followed me home. It followed me into the shower, into bed, into the mirror. It whispered that maybe they were right. That maybe love had made me small again. I started to avoid everyone. I barely ate. My phone filled with messages from unknown numbers, some mocking, some pitying. Photos of Adrian and Lena at events, smiling, glittering. He looked younger, lighter. Free. Then came the article in the local paper. Business power couple Adrian and Lena Mercer announce expansion. They even took my last name. My stomach turned. The accompanying photo showed them standing in front of a new company banner, one I had unknowingly helped fund. My name had been erased from the credits entirely. That night, I threw the newspaper into the sink, turned on the faucet, and watched the ink bleed into water. I wanted to disappear. I wanted the world to stop remembering me as the woman who was always left behind. A week later, I received a letter from the bank. My accounts were frozen pending ongoing marital asset disputes. Adrian had filed a claim that I had misused funds during our marriage. Lies. But in the eyes of the law, he was the one holding the narrative. I went to my parents' house, not out of hope but out of desperation. My mother opened the door, her lips pressed into a thin, disapproving line. "What did you expect me to do?" she said, crossing her arms. "We warned you about rushing into things." "I need help," I said. "Just until I find a place." My brother appeared behind her, holding a glass of whiskey. "You never learn, do you?" he said. "Always finding new ways to embarrass us." I felt something inside me die. "I'm not asking for money," I said softly. "Just somewhere to stay." Daniel smirked. "You should have thought of that before you ruined another man's life." "I ruined his life?" I asked, stunned. "That's what people are saying," my mother added. "He told us you were unstable, jealous, that you broke into his office." "Honestly, Helena, you make it hard to defend you." I stepped back, heart pounding. "You believe him?" My mother's silence was answer enough. When I turned to leave, Daniel said, "Don't come back this time. It's exhausting pretending we don't have a sister." The door closed behind me. It was raining, the kind of cold, relentless rain that soaks through clothes and skin until you feel transparent. I walked until my feet blistered, until I couldn't tell if the water on my face was rain or tears. That night, I checked into a cheap motel by the edge of town. The wallpaper was peeling, the sheets smelled of bleach, but at least it was mine. I stared at the ceiling and wondered if this was how lives ended, not with death, but with silence and mockery. The next morning, I woke to pounding on the door. I thought it was the motel manager, but it was worse, a courier with a thick brown envelope. "Mrs. Mercer?" he asked. I nodded weakly. He handed it over. "From Mercer and Company. Legal. My husband's company." Inside were divorce papers and a short letter in Adrian's handwriting. "Please sign quickly. Let's not make this ugly. You'll receive a settlement once everything clears." I laughed, hollow and sharp. Not make this ugly? It was already uglier than anything I could have imagined. Still, I didn't sign. Something inside me, small, stubborn, still alive, refused. That night, I walked outside to the motel's vending machine for water, and I caught my reflection in the glass, wet hair, tired eyes, trembling hands. And for the first time, I whispered, "You're still here." I didn't know if I meant it as comfort or defiance. But in that fragile whisper was the beginning of something else, a seed buried deep under humiliation. Because even in that cheap room, surrounded by everything I'd lost, I could feel it growing. Not hope. Not yet. Something colder. Stronger. A hunger for truth. The next morning, my phone buzzed with an unknown number again. I almost ignored it, until I saw the name flash across the screen. Caller ID, Harlan, attorney. The phone kept ringing, echoing through the stale motel air like something alive. I stared at the screen for a moment before answering. "Helena Mercer?" The voice was brisk, male, unfamiliar. "Yes. This is Michael Harlan, the managing partner from Harlan & Rowe. You may remember my late father, Edward Harlan. He represented your family years ago." My heart stuttered. "Yes. I remember him." "I believe it's time we spoke about your current situation," he said. "And possibly about something else, something your father left unfinished." "My father's been dead for 20 years. "I know," he said calmly. "But not everything he owned was buried with him." The line went silent for a few seconds, and then he added, "Can you come to my office this afternoon? It's important." I hesitated. The word important felt heavy, dangerous. Is this about my divorce? It might be about far more than that. I arrived at his office hours later, soaked from the rain, still trembling from a mix of exhaustion and fear. Harlan's firm occupied the top floor of an old building downtown, quietly elegant, lined with wood and glass and the kind of confidence that comes from generations of secrets. He was waiting at the door, his expression unreadable. "Mrs. Mercer," he greeted me, shaking my hand firmly. "I've reviewed your husband's filings, and frankly, you're in a precarious position." "I know," I said softly. "But that's not the only reason I called you." He walked to a file cabinet, pulled out a thick folder, and set it on the desk between us. This was found during a routine audit of our archived estates. "Your father's estate." My chest tightened. My brother already inherited everything. I was excluded. "That's what the public will stated," Harlan said, sliding a document toward me. "But this was private." I scanned the yellowed pages, the legal jargon blurring until a single line stood out, written in my father's unmistakable handwriting. "In the event of Daniel Mercer's mismanagement or legal misconduct, the controlling shares of Mercer Estates will revert to Helena Mercer, effective immediately." I looked up, breathless. "Mismanagement?" Harlan nodded. "Your brother's been under quiet investigation for years, tax discrepancies, falsified audits, possible fraud. If proven, the clause activates automatically." I couldn't speak. "For now," he continued, "this remains confidential. But should you choose to act, you become the rightful heir of your family's holdings. Every asset. Every property." It felt unreal, like the world had suddenly shifted beneath me. "I don't understand," I whispered. "Why now?" He leaned back. "Because your husband's dealings are tied to your brother's accounts. If Daniel falls, Adrian will fall with him. And if you're patient, you could take it all." Take it all. The words echoed in my mind long after I left his office. That night, I didn't return to the motel. I wandered the city instead, ending up in a small park by the river, the same bench I had sat on months before, when everything first collapsed. The same wind, the same ache in my chest, but this time, there was something different beneath the pain. Power. It didn't feel triumphant. It felt terrifying. The moon reflected off the water, silver and cold. I thought about the irony, how every man who had called me weak had unknowingly built the empire that could now destroy them. My father, Daniel, Adrian, all of them had underestimated the daughter, the sister, the wife who didn't understand business. And I smiled for the first time in weeks. But the smile faded quickly. I still had nothing, no home, no money, no credibility. Just a single legal clause buried in an old file and a lawyer who believed I could use it. I pulled my knees to my chest and whispered into the night, "What would you do, if you could?" The river didn't answer. But inside, I already knew. I would wait. I would watch. And when the time was right, I would let the truth burn through their lies like fire through paper. Days passed quietly after that. I met with Harlan again, this time armed with a list of my husband's and brother's joint transactions. He studied them, his brow furrowed. "They've crossed into criminal territory," he said. "We'll need documentation, proof that they used your name without consent." "I have some," I replied. "Emails, signatures, dates." He smiled faintly. "Good. Keep collecting. Don't confront anyone yet. The best revenge is not anger, it's accuracy." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake on the motel bed, replaying every moment that had led me here. Every insult, every laugh, every dismissal. My life had been built by other people's decisions, other people's narratives. Now, for the first time, I held a thread of my own. I started writing again, not letters, but records. A journal of facts, not feelings. Dates, times, documents. I called it the ledger of truth. Because truth, I realized, isn't always loud. Sometimes it waits in silence, gathering strength, until the world is forced to listen. One morning, as I was leaving the motel for another meeting with Harlan, I saw a newspaper headline at the convenience store next door. "Mercer Industries faces audit, CEO denies allegations." Daniel's face filled the front page. My heart pounded. The investigation had begun. I bought 3 copies, folded one into my bag, and whispered under my breath, "The house that didn't want me is starting to crack." Harlan called later that day. "This is it, Helena," he said. "Stay quiet. Let the chaos work for you." But chaos, I had learned, is never quiet. That evening, as I walked back to the motel, I noticed a sleek black car parked across the street. Tinted windows. Engine idling. I felt the prickling sense of being watched. When I reached my door, there was another envelope waiting. No return address, just my name written in Adrian's handwriting. Inside was a single line. "Stop digging, or I'll make sure you regret it." My hand shook. But not from fear, from recognition. The tone was familiar, like every warning I'd ever received from men who mistook cruelty for control. I looked out at the car still waiting across the road, then back at the letter, and felt something inside me click into place. They were scared. Finally. And that meant I was no longer powerless. That night, I went back to the park, the same bench, the same wind, the same darkness. But this time I didn't feel small. I felt ready. I whispered into the cold, "You took everything from me. My money. My name. My home. But you forgot one thing." The wind shifted, carrying my voice away. "I was raised in your house. I know how you think." The city lights shimmered on the water. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed. And I smiled, not with peace, but with promise. Because this was no longer about survival. It was about return. As I stood to leave, my phone buzzed again. A single text from Harlan. "Tomorrow. 9 a.m. Bring the envelope." The same envelope I had been saving since the night everything fell apart. The next morning, I arrived at Harlan's office before the city had fully woken up. The streets outside were slick with rain, the air heavy with that damp scent of endings and beginnings. I clutched the same envelope I'd carried since the night my world collapsed, the one I had never opened, the one that had somehow survived every fire in my life. Harlan was already waiting, sleeves rolled up, glasses low on his nose, a man who had seen too many family wars to be startled by another. He gestured toward the chair across from him. "Helena, sit. We have much to discuss." He poured coffee into 2 cups, black and strong. "What's in the envelope?" "I don't know," I admitted. "It was sent to me weeks ago. I kept it because something told me not to throw it away." He nodded. "Then let's see what fate's been holding back." My fingers hesitated before tearing the seal. The sound of paper ripping felt louder than it should have, like a door opening to something irreversible. Inside, there were several folded documents, legal in format, stamped, but not with Adrian's or Daniel's names. The top page read, "Trust Indenture, the estate of Edward Harlan." I frowned. "Your father?" "Yes," Harlan said, taking the papers from me carefully. He read silently, eyes darting quickly, and then looked up with something that resembled disbelief. "My father created a personal trust in your name." I blinked. "In my name?" He nodded. "Edward Harlan was your family's attorney for decades. He must have known something, perhaps felt guilt over how your father structured his will. This document was hidden, separate from your family's files. It declares you the sole beneficiary of a contingency fund set aside in the event your family's estate misused or concealed assets." I could barely process the words. "How much are we talking about?" Harlan flipped to the last page, scanning the ledger. When he finally spoke, his voice was even. "Adjusted for inflation and compounded interest, approximately $12 million. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. 12 million. Not an inheritance born from mercy, but from foresight. A secret correction written into the cracks of my family's corruption. Harlan leaned forward. "This account has been dormant for over 20 years. The assets are frozen under a private bank's custodial hold, but they can be released immediately once we verify your identity and activate the transfer clause." "My identity?" I whispered. He smiled faintly. You're the one they forgot, Helena. That makes you the safest name to hide behind. The room spun slightly. I pressed my palms against my knees, steadying myself. Why now? Why would this surface now? Because timing, Harlan said quietly, is the universe's favorite accomplice. I left his office in a daze. The city outside felt different, like every building knew something I didn't. I walked without direction, my thoughts tangled between disbelief and rage. For years, I'd begged for scraps, cried over bills, been humiliated in courtrooms and households, and all the while, a hidden fortune had been sleeping under my name. $12 million. I stopped at a cafe, ordered tea, and sat by the window, staring out at the rain. My reflection looked strange, tired, yes, but alive in a way it hadn't been for months. The server brought my drink and smiled politely. Rough morning? I almost laughed. Something like that. While sipping, I pulled out my phone and searched for Adrian's company online. His latest post filled the screen, a photo of him and Lena at a charity gala, their smiles practiced, his caption smug. Building the future together. I scrolled through the comments, praise, envy, adoration. No one saw the forgery beneath the tuxedo. No one knew the fraud wearing his name. I stared at the image until the edges blurred, until all I could see was the lie that had nearly destroyed me. Then I took a deep breath and whispered, you won't be building anything when I'm finished. That afternoon, I returned to Harlan's office with my identification, signatures, and the original trust documents. He met me at the door, already on the phone with the bank's trustee. We've confirmed everything, he said once he hung up. The transfer is legitimate. You'll have access within 72 hours. It felt unreal. You understand what this means, Harlan said, studying me. This isn't just inheritance. It's leverage. With this, you can retain the best legal team, investigate your husband and brother, and, should you choose, control what happens to the Mercer estate. I nodded slowly, my voice calm though my pulse thundered. I won't destroy them out of spite, Mr. Harlan. I'll destroy them because they built their empires on lies. He smiled, a tired, knowing smile. That's what justice looks like when it's personal. That evening, I walked through the city with the transfer confirmation letter folded neatly in my bag. For the first time, I felt taller. Not because of money, but because I finally had proof that my existence mattered, that I had been written into the story after all, only in a place they never looked. I stopped at a bridge overlooking the river, the same one where I had once thrown my wedding ring into the water. The lights shimmered below like scattered gold. I whispered, it's mine now. All of it. The wind carried my voice into the dark. Over the next few days, I stayed quiet. I didn't contact anyone. I didn't tell my mother, my brother, or even the few friends who still checked in out of obligation. I let them think I was broken, forgotten. Because silence, I had learned, was the most powerful disguise. While Adrian and Daniel flaunted their success online, I met privately with accountants, auditors, and lawyers recommended by Harlan's firm. Each meeting built another wall of protection, trusts, holdings, non-disclosures. Piece by piece, I was building an invisible empire. One that belonged solely to me. 3 days later, the bank transfer cleared. My balance reflected more zeros than I'd ever imagined possible. I stared at the screen for a long time, unable to move. I didn't feel joy exactly. I felt clarity. Everything they had stolen, my dignity, my confidence, my sense of belonging, could now be weaponized against them, polished into armor. I whispered to the empty room, you wanted to make me powerless. You just made me untouchable. Late that night, my phone rang again. It was Harlan. Helena, there's something else you should know, he said. I've received a notice, your husband's company has been subpoenaed. They're requesting full financial disclosure. I froze. Who requested it? The federal board. But the complaint was filed anonymously. A smile spread slowly across my face. Not anonymously, I murmured. Strategically. Harlan chuckled softly. I take it you're not as broken as they hoped. No, I said. Not broken. Just awake. When the call ended, I stood at the window and looked out over the city lights. Somewhere, Adrian was probably asleep beside her, dreaming of the fortune he thought he'd stolen. I smiled faintly. Because while he was sleeping, I was rising. And for the first time, I realized the true inheritance wasn't money. It was knowledge. They had trained me to understand silence, to live in shadows, to survive humiliation. But they forgot that survival itself is a kind of education. And I was done being the student. At dawn, my phone buzzed with a new message from an unknown number. We know what you've inherited. You're not safe. I stared at the screen, heart racing. The war had officially begun. The text message glared back at me, its threat pulsing in the dark like a live wire. We know what you've inherited. You're not safe. No name. No number. Just fear, compressed into 10 words. For a moment, I sat frozen in bed, my phone glowing like an open wound. My mind leapt immediately to 2 names, Adrian and Daniel. Who else would know? Who else would care? But fear, I had learned, is a luxury for those who can afford inaction. I couldn't. Not anymore. I rose, showered, dressed, and drove straight to Harlan's office. The city was gray that morning, washed in a cold drizzle that blurred everything: people, traffic lights, truth. He was already there, sipping black coffee as if he hadn't slept either. I got your message, he said. Show me. I handed him my phone. He studied the text, his expression tightening. They know about the trust. Yes, I said. But how? He sighed, rubbing his temple. Information leaks in quiet ways. Lawyers talk. Banks whisper. If someone connected the dots, they might realize you're no longer the woman they can intimidate. I leaned forward. Then let them realize it. He smiled faintly. Spoken like someone who's ready to use what she's earned. The next few days became a blur of legal calls and secret meetings. Harlan introduced me to a forensic accountant, a woman named Clara, with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. She sat across from me in a small conference room, surrounded by stacks of folders, her tone calm but precise. I've reviewed the Mercer files, she said. Your brother's finances are a labyrinth: hidden trusts, shell companies, off-the-book transfers. He's not just negligent. He's criminal. What about Adrian? I asked. Clara flipped another page. Tied to at least 2 of the same accounts. One offshore, one domestic. I'd bet half of your ex-husband's company is being funded through your family's money. I clenched my fists. They've been using me my whole life. First emotionally, now financially. She looked up. Then it's time you use them. Harlan nodded. Clara's right. We need evidence, clean, admissible, irrefutable. The kind that doesn't just expose them but dismantles them. I took a deep breath. Tell me what to do. That night, I sat in my small apartment surrounded by documents, bank statements, property records, emails I'd retrieved from old accounts. I worked through the night, marking connections with red pen, tracing money like veins through a diseased heart. By dawn, I had built something close to a map: arrows, timelines, names. At the center of it all, Daniel Mercer, CEO. Beneath him, Adrian Mercer, silent partner. And below them, a note in my handwriting: everything built on my bloodline. I stared at it until my vision blurred. Then, slowly, I smiled. 2 days later, Harlan arranged a private meeting at the bank where my father's trust was held. The manager, a tall, polished man named Mr. Royce, greeted us with professional stiffness. Mrs. Mercer, he said, I trust you're satisfied with the transfer process? Very, I said coolly. Though I'd like to ensure full discretion remains intact. He hesitated. Of course. However, given recent inquiries from your husband's company, I must advise caution. Inquiries? I repeated. Yes. Mr. Adrian Mercer requested verification of assets associated with your name. We, naturally, declined. My pulse quickened. He's trying to confirm the inheritance. Royce nodded. And he's desperate. His company is under investigation, and his accounts have been flagged. I suspect he'll reach out to you soon. I leaned back, forcing my voice steady. Then let him. I'd like to see how far his desperation goes. Harlan's lips curved faintly. Careful, Helena. Curiosity can be a weapon or a wound. Then I'll hold it by the blade. That night, I turned off every light in my apartment, sat by the window, and waited. I didn't know for what, maybe for a sign, maybe for courage. It came in the form of an email. From Adrian Mercer. Subject, we need to talk. I opened it. Helena, whatever you think you know, it's not the full story. Let's meet. Tomorrow, noon. Carlton Hotel, room 509. Please. Don't make this public. The same room where I had found him with her. I almost laughed. But instead of deleting it, I forwarded it to Harlan. Set up surveillance, I typed. And bring a recorder. His reply came seconds later, you're learning fast. When morning came, I dressed simply, a gray suit, no jewelry, no perfume. I wanted to look like the ghost he'd created, walking back into his life. I arrived at the hotel early, checked into the lobby cafe, and watched through the window as Adrian entered. He looked thinner, more nervous, the confidence drained from his posture. When I finally walked into the room, he turned sharply. Helena. Adrian. You look different. I am. He hesitated. Listen, about the past. I'm not here for apologies, I interrupted. You said you had something to tell me. He swallowed. They're turning on me. Daniel, your brother, he's blaming everything on me. He says the accounts were my idea. He's cutting me out. I raised an eyebrow. Imagine that. Betrayed by family. How original. His voice broke. I need your help. The words were so absurd I almost laughed. You forged my name. You left me with nothing. You humiliated me. And now you need my help? He stepped closer. Helena, please. You're the only one who can stop this. You have influence now, resources. If you don't intervene, they'll ruin me. I met his eyes, calm, steady. You already did that yourself. He blinked, confused, as I pulled a small device from my pocket and pressed the button. The faint red light blinked. Consider this conversation recorded, I said. For legal purposes. His face went pale. What are you doing? What you taught me, I said softly. Protecting what's mine. I turned to leave, but paused at the door. Oh, and Adrian? He looked up, shaking. I already stopped it. You just don't know it yet. Outside, I exhaled for what felt like the first time in months. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from release. Harlan was waiting in the car. Got it all? He asked. I nodded, handing him the recorder. He's panicking. He knows Daniel's turning on him. Good, Harlan said. Panic makes people sloppy. And sloppy people sign things they shouldn't. As we drove away, I looked back at the hotel, the same place where I had lost my dignity once. This time I had taken something back. Power. And I intended to use it. That night, I stood on the balcony of my apartment, the city alive beneath me. My phone buzzed again, this time with a bank notification. Incoming transfer, $12 million, Harlan Trust activation. It was real now. Tangible. Mine. I stared at the screen, feeling tears sting my eyes, not from joy, but from validation. Every insult, every betrayal, every night spent believing I was nothing had been rewritten by this one moment. And I whispered to the empty air, "You took my voice. I bought it back." The next morning, Clara called. Her tone was urgent. "Helena, you need to come in. We found something in Daniel's files, something that links your family's estate to your husband's company directly. If it's true, you don't just own the inheritance, you own them." Clara's office was dim when I arrived, the blinds half drawn, the smell of paper and black coffee clinging to the air. She didn't waste time with greetings, she slid a single flash drive across the table. "This," she said, tapping it once, "is the artery that connects everything." I stared at the small piece of metal like it was a detonator. "What am I looking at?" "Financial crosslinks," she explained. "Your brother's holding company, your husband's firm, and your father's trust accounts. Daniel used company funds to launder money through Adrian's business. But that's not the real secret." She opened her laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard. The screen filled with charts, transactions, transfers looping like spiderwebs. "See this name?" she said, pointing to a shell corporation buried deep in the chain, Mercer Heritage Developments. "On paper, it's Daniel's property. But look who actually owns it." I leaned forward. My breath caught. "Owner, Helena M. Mercer." My own name. Clara smiled faintly. "Your father created it before he died. A dormant entity, waiting for a trigger clause. Every time Daniel moved money through it, he was technically using your asset. And that makes every transaction taxable and traceable to you." I blinked, my mind struggling to catch up. "So everything he's done, every transfer, every stolen fund, came through my name?" "Exactly," she said. "Which means when the investigation completes, you won't be implicated. You'll be credited. And they'll be cornered." I sat back, stunned. Clara's voice softened. "Your father wasn't kind, but he wasn't stupid. He built his empire on control, and he must have known Daniel would eventually destroy it. So he left a silent heir, one none of them saw coming." Silent heir. The phrase felt heavy, sacred, dangerous. "So what happens now?" I asked quietly. "Now," she said, "we prepare." For the next several weeks, my life became methodical. Every morning, I met with Harlan and Clara, reviewing statements, printing emails, authenticating digital signatures. The office lights glowed late into the night as we built the framework for what would become the legal ambush of a lifetime. We didn't shout. We didn't rush. We planned. I learned to catalog evidence with precision, labeling every file, fraudulent signatures, offshore transfers, property laundering, witness statements. The more I uncovered, the clearer the picture became. My brother and my husband had been siphoning money for years, hiding it under my identity, confident I'd never notice. And they were right, until now. Each document I added to the growing pile felt like a piece of armor. The shame that had once defined me was now fuel, refined into focus. Harlan once told me, "Justice isn't a storm, Helena. It's erosion, slow, patient, inevitable." I was learning the art of erosion. One night, while organizing files, I found myself staring at an old photo, Daniel and me as children, standing in front of our family vineyard. He had his arm around me, both of us smiling, unaware of the war waiting in our bloodline. I traced the edge of the photo with my thumb. "You should have protected me," I whispered. "You should have been my brother." I slipped the photo into the evidence box. Family memories were now exhibits. A week later, Clara brought new information. She placed a thick folder on my desk. "These are communications between Daniel and your husband. Emails, encrypted messages. We decrypted them last night." I opened the first page. From Daniel Mercer to Adrian Mercer. Subject, Helena. She's still quiet. Good. Keep her that way. Once the audit is over, we'll move everything under the Hartman name. She won't have a clue. I felt my throat tighten. I flipped through page after page, plans, timelines, instructions on how to manipulate me into signing documents, how to isolate me emotionally, even suggestions for encouraging her compliance. I stopped at one message, my hands shaking. If she becomes a problem, remind her she has nothing. People like her break easily. I closed the folder slowly, the fury inside me rising like a tide. They wanted me broken, I said quietly. Clara nodded. Then give them what they deserve, a woman who never breaks the same way twice. That evening, I went home and laid everything on the floor, every folder, every photo, every piece of evidence. The apartment looked like the inside of a war room. I stood in the center, barefoot, surrounded by paper. This was my battlefield now. I started recording audio memos, documenting every detail for court, names, dates, quotes. I practiced statements out loud until my voice no longer trembled when I said, they forged my signature. Until I could say, they defrauded the company, without my throat tightening. And when I rehearsed the line, my husband and my brother conspired against me, I felt something shift in the air, like the universe was finally listening. 2 nights before the court hearing, Harlan called. It's time, he said. Everything's ready. The judge has approved your evidence submission. Tomorrow we file. I exhaled, the weight of years pressing against my chest. And them? They don't know yet, he said. Daniel's still confident he can talk his way out of the audit. Adrian thinks his charm will save him. Neither has any idea that the same trust they tried to exploit is the one protecting you. I smiled faintly. Then let's keep it that way. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, the city humming quietly below. I watched headlights streak across the wet streets and wondered if my father had felt this same stillness before his own battles. Was he proud of me? Or terrified of what I'd become? I'd never know. But I knew one thing, I wasn't fighting just for revenge. I was fighting for recognition, that I had always been there, always watching, always remembering. At midnight, I opened the final envelope Harlan had given me, my official subpoena request for both Daniel and Adrian to appear in court. Their names looked small beneath mine. It was poetic. For years, I'd been written out of the narrative. Now, their downfall would be filed under my case number. When dawn came, I packed every file into a leather case. I looked around the apartment, silent, bare, temporary. Next time, I whispered to the walls, it'll be my house. My rules. I slipped on my coat, picked up the case, and walked into the gray morning light. At the courthouse entrance, Harlan met me with a nod. You ready? More than I've ever been. He smiled. Then let's begin. We handed the evidence to the clerk. The official stamp echoed across the marble hall like a gunshot. With that sound, the war officially started. That night, I sat alone, staring at the city skyline. For the first time, I felt no fear, no guilt, no need to justify my pain. I had turned it into a weapon. And in 72 hours, the people who had once laughed at my weakness would finally learn what power sounded like, my voice, under oath. As I locked the case and prepared for bed, my phone buzzed again. This time, the message wasn't a threat. Court hearing scheduled, Mercer vs. Mercer, Friday 10 a.m. I smiled into the darkness. The stage was set. When you've lived your entire life surrounded by liars, you learn the rhythm of deceit, the pauses, the word choices, the tone people use when they're hiding knives behind compliments. I knew my family's rhythm better than I knew my own heartbeat. The hearing was scheduled in 3 days, and every second between now and then mattered. I couldn't afford another blind spot, another betrayal. I needed proof that spoke louder than memory. So, I began recording. Not just documents. Voices. It started with Daniel. I called him from a new number. He answered instantly, his tone sharp with suspicion. Who is this? It's me, I said quietly. Helena. A pause. Then laughter, small, disbelieving. You finally remembered you have a brother? I heard about the audit, I said evenly. You must be under a lot of pressure. What do you want? To help. That word softened him, just a little. Help? You? Helena, you've never understood business. Stay out of things that don't concern you. I'm concerned because my name's on some of the accounts, I replied. We both know that wasn't an accident. His silence told me I'd hit something raw. I lowered my voice. Daniel, if you want to get through this, you'll need someone who knows what evidence they have. You'll need me. He exhaled heavily. You always did know how to play the victim, didn't you? Fine. Meet me at the old vineyard tomorrow morning. We'll talk in person. I smiled to myself. See you there. The call ended, and the recorder in my pocket clicked off. The next morning, the vineyard was exactly as I remembered, wild vines curling around stone walls, the air heavy with memories that no longer belonged to me. Daniel was already there, leaning against his car, expensive sunglasses hiding the eyes that once used to terrify me. Helena, he said, forcing a smile. You look different. I am different. He glanced around, lowering his voice. We both know the audit's nonsense. It'll blow over. But I need you to sign something to clear the paper trail, just a formality. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a thin folder. I didn't take it. What is it? Confirmation that the Mercer Heritage account was inactive during the last 5 years. You'll sign, I'll file it, and the auditors will stop sniffing around. I tilted my head. You want me to lie under oath? He stiffened. It's just business. That's what Dad said before he disowned me. Danielle smirked. Dad was right about one thing, you always take things personally. My recorder was hidden inside my handbag, already blinking red. Every word he spoke, every smug syllable, was being captured. He stepped closer. Helena, listen to me. If this investigation goes south, you lose too. You think Harlan's on your side? He's using you. When this all collapses, you'll have nothing again. Nothing? I said softly. That's what you thought the last time. He frowned. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing you'd understand, I said, smiling faintly. He shoved the folder into my hands. Sign it. I looked down at the page. The signature line already had my name typed beneath it. Beneath that, a declaration that the account was jointly managed under Daniel Mercer, CEO. They were still using me, still trying to bury their crimes under my name. I met his eyes. You really don't change. I protect what's mine, he snapped. So do I whispered, and closed the folder without signing it. He stepped forward, voice sharp. Helena, if you think you can take this family down, you're insane. You're nobody. A bitter ex-wife with a victim complex. I smiled then, quietly. If I'm nobody, why are you sweating? He froze. For a moment, he looked like the child I remembered, small, caught, terrified of being exposed. But then he recovered, turning away with a scoff. Suit yourself. Just remember, when this is over, no one will believe you. I turned and walked back to my car. As I opened the door, the wind carried his voice behind me, muttering something under his breath. The recorder caught every word. That night, Harlan and I replayed the audio together in his office. Daniel's arrogance echoed through the speakers like music. Perfect, Harlan said, nodding. He's just confessed to using your account. This, plus the documents, gives us probable cause to submit new evidence before the hearing. Clara leaned in. We should record Adrian next. Corner him separately. He'll panic faster. I smiled grimly. I know how to make him talk. 2 days later, I called Adrian. My tone was soft, apologetic. I just want to end this quietly, I told him. Meet me. No lawyers. No drama. He agreed too quickly. We met at a small cafe, the kind of place where people went to pretend civility while plotting ruin. He looked exhausted, sweat damp on his collar, eyes darting around. "You've heard, haven't you?" he said, leaning in. "Daniel's finished. They're coming for him." "I heard," I said. "He mentioned you might be involved." Adrian's expression twisted. "He's lying. I only did what he told me to. He said your accounts were fair game, that it was all part of the family business." "So, you admit you knew?" I asked quietly. His eyes widened. "No, I mean, look, I was following orders. You know how he is. I never meant to hurt you." My recorder blinked red inside my purse again. I took a sip of coffee. "You forged my signature." He swallowed. "Only once. It was a misunderstanding." "On a multi-million-dollar transfer?" He slammed his hands on the table. "Damn it, Helena, I was desperate." Heads turned from nearby tables. I stayed calm, watching him unravel. He lowered his voice, almost whispering. "Please, if this goes public, I'm done. Help me. I'll give you whatever you want." I leaned closer. "I want the truth." He looked at me like a cornered animal. "Fine," he said. "It was Daniel's plan. The offshores, the transfers, all of it. He told me you'd never know because you were too broken to fight." My heart pounded, but my face didn't move. "I think," I said softly, "you've just given me everything I need." His brow furrowed. "What?" I stood, slid my bag over my shoulder, and looked down at him with the calm I had waited my entire life to feel. "Next time, Adrian, check if the woman you underestimate has a recorder." That night, we added Adrian's confession to the growing archive of evidence. Hours of audio, countless documents, and the digital footprint of greed. Harlan called it a masterpiece of truth. But to me, it wasn't art. It was survival. Before leaving, he said, "Tomorrow, we file the final evidence packet. Once that's in, there's no turning back." I nodded. "I don't want to turn back." He smiled faintly. "Good. Because once this goes public, there'll be no way for them to bury you again." When I got home, I sat in silence. The city lights spilled through my window, streaking the walls in gold. I played the recordings once more, Daniel's arrogance, Adrian's desperation, and realized something strange. Their voices no longer frightened me. They sounded small. Like ghosts fading out of relevance. I took the recorder, labeled it Monsters, Exhibit A, and slipped it into the evidence case beside the others. Then I whispered, "Your voices built my prison. Now they'll build my freedom." At dawn, my phone buzzed with a message from Harlan. "The judge has allowed early presentation. Court moved to tomorrow. Bring everything." Tomorrow, the monsters would speak, whether they wanted to or not. I didn't sleep that night. The clock on my nightstand blinked relentlessly, each minute thudding against my ribs like a countdown. Tomorrow, I would face them all, my brother, my husband, my mother's absence. Every humiliation I'd endured would stand on record. But tonight, I wasn't afraid. Because I had proof. And proof doesn't beg to be believed. It commands. Still, there was one piece missing, the final key to make everything collapse at once. Daniel and Adrian were tangled together by crime, but I needed an insider to connect them to the fraud on paper. Someone who had been there. That's when Clara called. Her voice was low, urgent. "Helena, I found someone who used to work for your brother. A woman named Tessa Lang. She handled bookkeeping for Mercer Holdings 5 years ago before she was fired. She has files. She wants to talk, but there's a catch." "Money?" I guessed. "Protection," Clara said. "She's afraid. Says Daniel threatened her when she left. She'll only speak to you directly." I hesitated. Meeting an ex-employee the night before court felt reckless, but something in Clara's tone told me it mattered. "Where?" She'll be at a diner on Westbridge, 10 o'clock tonight. She doesn't trust phones. Then I'll go, I said. The diner was nearly empty when I arrived. Fluorescent lights hummed above chipped booths. Outside, the rain hissed against the windows, soft and endless. Tessa was already there, mid-40s, thin, wearing a coat too big for her frame. Her eyes darted to the door the moment I stepped inside. You came, she said quietly. I'm here, I replied, sliding into the seat across from her. You worked for my brother. She nodded. Until he made sure I didn't anymore. What do you have? Tessa looked around, lowering her voice. I was the one handling the secondary ledgers, what your brother called the shadow accounts. They're not in the official audits, but they show exactly where the money went. Offshore transfers. Real estate buys. And your husband's name? I swallowed hard. Adrian's? Yes. He was listed as an independent contractor on every major payout. Daniel signed off on each one. My hands tightened on the edge of the table. You kept copies? Tessa nodded, slipping a flash drive from her coat pocket. Encrypted. Multiple backups. I don't want to keep it anymore. I stared at it, small and unassuming, yet heavier than anything I'd ever held. Why now? I asked. Why help me? Her lips trembled. Because I watched him destroy people. I thought it would never reach me, but when he fired me, he froze my pension. Said I was disloyal. Then last week, I heard you were fighting him. I thought, maybe it's time someone wins against him. She pushed the drive across the table. You're not the first he stepped on, Helena. But maybe you'll be the last. I reached for it slowly. You'll be protected. I'll make sure of it. Her eyes filled with relief and fear. Be careful. He's desperate. He knows he's slipping. Then she stood, buttoned her coat, and disappeared into the rain. I sat there for a long time, staring at the small drive resting in my palm. It felt like fate itself had handed me the last piece of the puzzle. Back at Harlan's office, I handed him the flash drive. We have our witness, I said. He loaded the files on his computer. Lines of data filled the screen, transactions, timestamps, signatures. Each one another nail in their coffin. Good God, he murmured. This isn't just fraud. This is corporate treason. They've been moving money through shell firms for years, yours, your father's, even through charities. Will the court accept it? He nodded slowly. If we can authenticate it before morning, yes. This, he tapped the screen, is the kind of evidence that ends dynasties. Then let's end one. Clara joined us shortly after midnight, her hair damp from the storm. I ran a trace on the transactions, she said. The last transfer happened yesterday. Adrian moved $2 million from Daniel's account to his own. He's stealing from your brother now. I blinked. He turned on him already. Harlan smiled grimly. Perfect. They'll blame each other in court. Division is our best weapon. We spent the next hours printing exhibits, labeling folders, building timelines. Harlan dictated strategy while Clara typed notes. At 3:12 a.m., we paused, surrounded by towers of paper. Do you realize, Harlan said softly, by this time tomorrow, everything they built will belong to you? I looked at the evidence spread before me, the receipts, the contracts, the ledgers. Years of deceit condensed into pages and ink. I don't want it because it's theirs, I said quietly. I want it because it was always supposed to be mine. He nodded slowly. Spoken like someone ready for war. As dawn crept through the blinds, I packed the folders into a single leather case. My hands didn't shake anymore. The fear that had once ruled me had transformed into clarity. Before leaving, I asked Harlan one last question. Do you think they'll show up? Oh, they'll show, he said with a smirk. Men like them never believe the woman has already won. The courthouse loomed ahead, pale against the morning sky. I stood at the entrance, rain drizzling softly over the steps. My reflection shimmered faintly in the puddles, steady, unrecognizable, new. Harlan joined me at the door. Final evidence secured? I patted the case. Every ghost accounted for. He smiled. Then let's make them haunt themselves. The hearing began at 10 sharp. The courtroom was cold, clinical, indifferent to the lives unraveling within it. Daniel sat on one side, his jaw clenched, his lawyer whispering furiously. Adrian sat behind him, pale, avoiding my gaze. When I walked in, both of them froze. Daniel's lips curled into a smirk. You shouldn't have come, Helena. I smiled faintly. I always show up when there's something worth watching. The bailiff called the room to order. The judge entered. Files shuffled, microphones clicked on. And in that still moment, the weight of generations pressed down on me, the daughter ignored, the sister dismissed, the wife betrayed. All of them converging here, in one sterile room, under the same fluorescent light. The judge's voice cut through the air. Mrs. Mercer, you've submitted additional evidence overnight. Is that correct? Yes, Your Honor. Would you like to explain? Harlan stood beside me, his tone steady. We have documentation proving financial fraud, forged signatures, and the misuse of Mrs. Mercer's inheritance. We will present evidence that the defendants conspired to defraud both the Mercer family estate and external shareholders. The judge nodded. Proceed. Harlan opened the case and began laying out the files one by one, each page sliding across the wood like a verdict. Daniel's confidence faltered with every word. Adrian's hands began to tremble. I watched in silence, remembering every night I'd been told to stay quiet, every insult disguised as advice. And for the first time, silence didn't feel like submission. It felt like victory. When the judge asked for final exhibits, Harlan held up a small flash drive, the one from Tessa. This, he said, connects every crime. Daniel's lawyer shot to his feet, shouting, "Objection! That evidence is inadmissible." But the judge's gavel struck down. Overruled. Let's hear it. And as the playback began, Daniel's voice filled the courtroom, his arrogance echoing for everyone to hear. The night before the final hearing, I didn't sleep. The rain outside fell with mechanical precision, tapping against my window like a metronome keeping time with my pulse. Every part of me was vibrating, exhaustion, fear, anticipation, all braided together into something I couldn't name. The folders were packed. The audio recordings labeled. The exhibits sealed. Still, I couldn't stop pacing the apartment. Every step carried the ghost of a memory, my father's voice, my brother's laughter, Adrian's smug smile. They all lived somewhere inside me, trying to whisper doubt. But doubt had no home here anymore. I made tea, the same way I used to when I was still pretending my marriage could be saved. The kettle hissed like the past, furious and pointless. I poured, stirred, and sat at my table surrounded by silence. The clock read 2:47 a.m. In a few hours, the world that had treated me like a footnote would have to listen. I opened my laptop one more time and reviewed the case outline. Harlan's notes were meticulous. Stay composed. Do not interrupt. Let the evidence speak. That phrase comforted me, let the evidence speak. Because for years, it had only been me, my word against theirs, my pain against their lies. Now I had proof. Cold, clear, irrefutable. My hand brushed over the envelope I'd been saving since that first court date, the one that started all of this. I hadn't opened it yet. Harlan said it was optional, not required for tomorrow's filing. It's symbolic, he'd said, but sometimes the right symbol can silence a courtroom. I hadn't understood what he meant until tonight. Around 3, my phone buzzed. I thought it might be Harlan, but it wasn't. The screen showed a single name I hadn't seen in months. Mother. For a moment, I just stared at it, debating whether to answer. Then I did. Helena, her voice came through, weary but sharp. I heard about the hearing tomorrow. Daniel called me. Of course he had. She sighed, the kind of sigh she used when she was about to make cruelty sound reasonable. Do you really have to do this publicly? He's your brother. We can settle this privately, as a family. I laughed softly. A family? We stopped being one a long time ago. You're exaggerating, she said. You always were dramatic. Dramatic? My voice broke on a bitter laugh. You stood there and watched while they stole everything from me. You believed every lie they told. You never asked if I was okay. You made your choices, she snapped. You married wrong men, you pushed us away. You've always been. Too much? I finished for her. Too emotional? Too alive? Silence. Then she said, quieter, you don't understand, Helena. Men like your father, Daniel, even Adrian, they survive because they know when to stop fighting. Maybe, I said, my tone turning cold, but women like me survive because we never stop. She didn't reply. When I ended the call, my hands were shaking, but not from pain. From release. I went to the mirror. My reflection looked almost unfamiliar, hard lines, steady eyes. I looked like my father, but sharper. The daughter he underestimated had inherited everything he never gave willingly, his resolve. I whispered to the mirror, tomorrow, you stop being their story. Then I opened the envelope. Inside was a single document, folded twice. My name at the top in bold. Last addendum to the Mercer Estate Trust. I scanned the first few lines, my breath catching. In the event that all primary successors are found unfit due to misconduct or malfeasance, ownership of all remaining family assets shall transfer solely to Helena Mercer, without contest, to protect the integrity of the estate. I sank into my chair. The air seemed to vanish around me. It wasn't just my brother's downfall on the line tomorrow, it was the total transfer of everything our family had ever owned. The vineyards. The properties. The company. The name. All of it would revert to me. The girl they threw away. The one they called dramatic, ungrateful, inconvenient. A slow, trembling smile broke through my exhaustion. So this was it, I whispered. This was the real inheritance. Not the money. Not the land. The power to choose what came next. At dawn, I drove to the courthouse. The city was still half asleep, but the air buzzed with electricity. The streets were wet and shining, reflecting the skyline like a mirror, just like me, I thought, finally reflecting what had been hidden beneath my surface all along. When I parked, I sat in the car for a few moments, letting the silence hold me. I remembered being a little girl in that big, cold house, listening to my father and Daniel talk about future ownership. I remembered standing outside my own wedding, crying in the rain. I remembered the motel, the whispers, the humiliation. And then I remembered the first time I whispered, no more. I touched the envelope resting on the passenger seat. It felt warm, alive, almost humming with history. Let's finish it, I said to the empty car. Inside the courthouse, the marble floors gleamed under fluorescent light. Reporters waited outside the courtroom doors, word of the inheritance dispute had spread. I ignored them. Harlan met me near the entrance, his tie slightly askew, eyes sharp behind his glasses. You didn't sleep, did you? Who sleeps before revolutions? He chuckled quietly. Keep that fire. You'll need it. He handed me a sleek black folder. Everything is in here. Financial exhibits, audio transcripts, the testimony from Tessa, the legal addendum from the estate. We'll submit them in sequence. Once the final clause is read, they're finished. I looked at the folder. And the envelope? He smiled. Hold it till the end. Let them think they've seen everything. When the judge asks for final words, then you hand it over. Will it be enough? Enough? He adjusted his glasses. Helena, it's annihilation in paper form. We stood together outside the courtroom doors as people began filing in, Daniel's lawyer, Adrian's counsel, the auditors, even my mother, flanked by her loyal mask of quiet shame. Harlan leaned toward me. "Whatever happens in there, remember, don't flinch." I met his gaze. "I forgot how to, years ago." Then the bailiff called, "Case 518, Mercer vs. Mercer." The doors opened. As I stepped inside, every sound seemed to fall away. The world narrowed to one thing: justice waiting on the other side of a polished oak table. When I took my seat, Daniel turned toward me and smiled, his confidence venom slick. "Hope you slept well, little sister," he whispered. "You're about to lose again." I smiled back. "You should have asked about the envelope." The courtroom felt like a tomb: cold air, hard benches, the scent of polished wood and old power. Every whisper, every rustle of paper echoed. People had come to watch, to feast on drama disguised as justice. Cameras weren't allowed, but the spectators' eyes were sharper than any lens. I sat at the plaintiff's table, my posture straight, hands folded over the black folder Harlan had prepared. Across from me sat my brother Daniel, chin high, arrogance lacquered into every movement. Adrian was behind him, trying to look invisible in a tailored suit that suddenly seemed too big for him. My mother sat at the back, her pearls trembling against her throat, refusing to meet my eyes. When the judge entered, everyone stood. "Be seated," she said curtly. Papers shuffled. The hearing began. Daniel's lawyer stood first, tall and oiled in charm. "Your Honor," he began, "my client, Mr. Daniel Mercer, wishes to clarify this unnecessary conflict. His sister, Mrs. Helena Mercer, has recently come into possession of certain funds under questionable circumstances. We contend she's attempting to defraud the family estate by—" Harlan cut in smoothly. "Objection, Your Honor. Baseless claim. My client's inheritance has been verified and legally transferred. What we're here to discuss is their fraud, not her legitimacy." The judge nodded. "Noted. Continue." The lawyer smiled thinly. "We will, Your Honor. But let's start with a simple truth: this case isn't about justice. It's about revenge." I felt Daniel's gaze slide toward me, smug and heavy. "My sister," he said loudly, leaning forward so the room could hear, "has always had a flair for dramatics. She couldn't handle responsibility. She ran from every problem she ever had, and now she's back to cash in on the family name she abandoned." My heart thudded once, then steadied. I met his eyes. "I didn't abandon anything," I said. "You threw me out." He smirked. "You were never built for the business world, Helena. You were born soft. And now, you think a few papers make you powerful?" The judge banged her gavel lightly. "Mr. Mercer, please limit your commentary to relevant testimony." He nodded, but the arrogance never left his face. "Of course, Your Honor. It's just, I find it ironic that she's trying to accuse me of mismanaging the estate when she's the one living off inherited money." A ripple of laughter passed through the room. Harlan didn't move. Neither did I. Then Daniel leaned back, looked straight at the judge, and said the line that would haunt him for the rest of his life. "I'll live off her money anyway, Your Honor. She got lucky, that's all. Someone always has to clean up the mess after a pretty face breaks down." The words landed like a slap across my history. The courtroom fell silent. Even Adrian looked at him, startled. I turned to Harlan. "Play it," I whispered. He nodded once. A moment later, the courtroom speakers crackled to life. My brother's own voice filled the room, recorded just days before, at the vineyard. Cold, calculated, self-satisfied. "Helena, if you think you can take this family down, you're insane. You're nobody. A bitter ex-wife with a victim complex. You sign this, we bury the evidence, and no one ever knows." Gasps rippled through the benches. Daniel's face went pale. Harlan spoke evenly. "That, Your Honor, is Exhibit E, an audio recording of Mr. Mercer coercing my client into signing falsified documents. There's more." He clicked the next file. Adrian's voice followed. Fine, it was Daniel's plan. The offshores, the transfers, all of it. He told me you'd never know because you were too broken to fight. Adrian froze, eyes wide. His lawyer muttered something frantically, but the damage was done. The judge's expression hardened. Harlan walked forward, calm as stone. These recordings, Your Honor, were legally obtained. Together, they establish collusion, fraud, and manipulation for financial gain. Furthermore, we have forensic documentation showing that both men used my client's name in unlawful transactions. The judge turned to Daniel. Do you deny these recordings? Daniel's jaw clenched. They're taken out of context. Context? Harlan echoed. Please enlighten us, what context justifies forging your sister's signature? No answer. The judge nodded toward me. Mrs. Mercer, do you have anything to add? I rose, my legs steady, my voice calm but clear. Your Honor, my brother has spent his life convincing everyone I was fragile, emotional, unfit. Maybe I was once. But fragility isn't the same as stupidity. I may have cried when they threw me out, but I didn't forget. Every lie they told, every form they forged, every insult they laughed at, I remembered. I kept everything. I paused, my eyes meeting Daniel's. And now the truth is louder than both of you. The courtroom was so silent that I could hear the rain tapping against the high windows. Then Harlan opened the black folder and pulled out the flash drive. Your Honor, he said, Exhibit F, financial records from a former employee of Mercer Holdings, linking these transfers to Adrian Mercer's business accounts. He handed it to the bailiff. We request immediate review. The judge nodded, turning to the clerk. Proceed. The sound of papers flipping filled the air. Daniel whispered something to his lawyer, panic beginning to edge his voice. Adrian rubbed his forehead, mumbling to himself. My mother's hand trembled at her throat. And then, as the judge began reading the printouts, I saw it, the first crack in Daniel's mask. His jaw twitched. His breath quickened. His empire, his certainty, was collapsing right there in front of him. I wanted to feel triumph, but what I felt instead was something cleaner, vindication. Not revenge. Just balance. The judge looked up. We'll need to recess briefly to authenticate these new records. Mr. Mercer, I advise you and your counsel to prepare responses. Daniel tried to speak, but his lawyer put a hand on his arm. Don't, he hissed. Harlan turned to me. You all right? I nodded. Better than ever. As the courtroom emptied for recess, Daniel glared at me. You think you've won? You don't know how deep this goes. I leaned close enough for only him to hear. Then maybe you should have built it on something stronger than lies. I sat back down, fingers brushing over the envelope in my bag. The judge hadn't seen it yet. The real inheritance clause, the final twist in a story that had begun long before any of them realized it. Let them think this was the end. They hadn't even seen the last card. As the bailiff called for order, the judge re-entered with the file in her hands. Mrs. Mercer, she said, I believe the document you're carrying may be relevant to this case. Do you wish to submit it for record? I looked down at the envelope, the one I had sworn to open only when everything else had fallen apart. I stood slowly. Yes, Your Honor, I said. It's time. When I stood, the courtroom seemed to lean with me. All eyes followed as I reached into my bag and drew out the thick, cream-colored envelope, the same one that had followed me through every fall, every humiliation, every sleepless night. Your Honor, I said, voice steady, this document was discovered among my father's private files. It concerns the legal ownership and control of the Mercer estate, including all subsidiaries and holdings under the family trust. The judge gestured for the bailiff to retrieve it. Please approach. My heels clicked softly against the marble as I walked forward, the sound measured, deliberate. I handed the envelope to the bailiff, but my fingers lingered on it for a second longer than necessary, long enough to remind myself that this was it. The moment I had carried for years like a secret heartbeat. When I returned to my seat, Daniel was watching me with narrowed eyes. "What the hell is that?" he hissed. I smiled faintly. "Something Dad didn't trust you with." Harlan sat still beside me, his expression unreadable except for the flicker of quiet satisfaction in his eyes. The judge slid open the envelope carefully. Paper slid out, aged but preserved, embossed with my father's seal. She adjusted her glasses and began to read aloud. "This addendum supersedes all prior versions of the Mercer Estate Trust, and shall serve as final instruction in the event of ethical breach or fiscal misconduct by any successor." The courtroom held its breath. Even the air seemed to pause. "In such an event," the judge continued, her voice level, "the Mercer Estate, including all business holdings, real property, and financial assets, shall be transferred in full and irrevocable control to Mrs. Helena M. Mercer, to preserve the family's integrity and legacy." The words echoed across the room like thunder breaking glass. Daniel shot to his feet. "That's a forgery." The judge's gavel struck once. "Sit down, Mr. Mercer. This document bears notarized signatures and corporate witnesses dated prior to your father's passing. It appears authentic." I watched my brother collapse back into his chair, color draining from his face. Adrian's eyes darted between us like a trapped animal. Harlan rose. "Your Honor, if I may supplement, this clause corresponds precisely with a dormant entity already registered under Mrs. Mercer's name, Mercer Heritage Developments. The forensic accountants have verified it. Every fraudulent transfer the defendants made was processed through an account legally belonging to my client." The judge looked stunned. "Meaning?" "Meaning," Harlan said with measured calm, "that every stolen cent technically belongs to her." The room erupted, lawyers shouting, reporters scribbling, my mother gasping audibly in the back row. The judge slammed the gavel again. "Order! Order!" Daniel's lawyer leaned in frantically, whispering to him. Adrian muttered under his breath, shaking his head. Harlan turned to me, lowering his voice. "You've just reclaimed everything." But I wasn't smiling. Not yet. There was still one more truth the world hadn't heard. I rose again. "Your Honor, may I address the court?" She nodded cautiously. "Proceed." I walked to the front, facing the people who had shaped my downfall. "When my father died," I began, "I thought he left me nothing but shame. I thought he chose them over me, the same way he always had. But what I didn't know was that he left me something better than love or money. He left me choice. The choice to be different. The choice to end this cycle." My gaze found Daniel's. "For years, you called me the weak one. You said I'd never stand up to you. And yet, here we are. You tried to bury me under your crimes, and all you did was dig your own grave." I turned to Adrian. "You said I was too broken to fight. You built your empire on my silence. You made me think being quiet was survival. But today, I learned that silence can also be power, when it's strategic." Adrian's jaw tightened. I looked at the judge. "I don't just want restitution. I want truth on record. I want the court to see the pattern that allowed this. Every woman told to be smaller, quieter, less demanding. Every lie hidden under the word family. I want it all exposed." For a moment, the judge's expression softened. "Noted," she said quietly. "And it will be." Harlan cleared his throat. "Your Honor, as per the trust's final clause, we request immediate transfer of estate authority and freezing of all accounts under the defendants' names until further ruling." Daniel slammed his palm on the table. "This isn't over." The judge glared. "Mr. Mercer, if you interrupt again, I'll hold you in contempt." He slumped back, muttering, "She doesn't deserve it. She never worked for it." I turned to him. "You're right. I didn't work for it. I worked through it. Through your cruelty, your arrogance, your betrayal. And unlike you, I earned every scar that brought me here." The words hit him harder than any verdict could. The judge signed the order with a single stroke of her pen. Effective immediately, control of the Mercer estate transfers to Mrs. Helena Mercer. All pending investigations into corporate fraud will proceed with her cooperation. The defendants are hereby restricted from access to any estate assets until further notice. The gavel fell. Recess for review. Just like that, it was done. As people began murmuring, Daniel turned to Adrian, fury trembling in every muscle. "You said she couldn't touch this." Adrian whispered back, voice cracking, "You told me it was safe." Their words tangled in the chaos, sharp and panicked. I sat still, watching the empire they built on deceit crumble in front of me. My heart wasn't racing anymore. It was steady, measured, alive. For years, I'd been the quiet one, the obedient daughter, the fragile wife, the invisible woman. But invisibility, I realized, had been my camouflage. And now, standing in the debris of their arrogance, I understood something profound. They never feared losing the money. They feared losing control over me. And they just did. When the recess bell rang, Harlan leaned toward me. "You did it." "No," I said softly. "We're not finished." Not until they admit it in their own words. He raised an eyebrow. "You're going to make them confess?" "I already have," I whispered, tapping the recorder hidden in my coat pocket. As I gathered my papers, Daniel stood, shouting across the room, "You think you've won? You'll regret this, Helena. You'll regret everything." I turned to him, calm and cold. "No, Daniel. You will." Behind him, Adrian's lawyer whispered something, and Adrian's face turned white. Whatever it wasn't about money. Harlan's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen, then up at me. "Helena, there's been a warrant issued." My pulse spiked. "For who?" He met my eyes. "For them both." The courtroom erupted into chaos the moment Harlan spoke those words. "For them both." I turned sharply. "What do you mean?" He lowered his voice, eyes flicking to the officers entering from the back doors. "The forensic evidence we submitted, those offshore transfers? The court just verified them through Interpol's database. The accounts aren't just fraudulent. They're criminally tied to tax evasion and international laundering." I blinked, my mind spinning. "So, the warrant is for Daniel Mercer and Adrian Mercer," he finished quietly. Across the aisle, Daniel's lawyer whispered something frantic to his client. Adrian's face had gone white. The judge was speaking, but her words came through like echoes from underwater. I caught fragments: pending arrest, remand into custody, investigation ongoing. The gavel struck. Once, twice. Each sound a nail in the coffin of my old life. Daniel shot up, voice shaking. "This is insane. You can't do this. I'm the executor of my father's estate." "Not anymore," I said softly. He turned on me, his rage almost theatrical. "You think this makes you powerful? You were nothing before me, before us. Everything you own came from me." I met his fury with silence. Silence is what terrifies men like him, it's what they can't conquer. The officer stepped forward. "Mr. Mercer, please come with us." He backed away, desperate. "You can't. This is a mistake. She forged those papers, she set me up." Adrian jumped to his feet. "Don't drag me into this." "Oh, you're in it," Daniel spat, eyes wild. "You were the one moving the money. You were the one who—" "Enough!" Adrian roared, pointing at me. "She's behind this." "You think she's innocent?" "She's manipulating everyone, she's always been like this." The judge slammed her gavel. "Mr. Mercer, you're out of order. Both of you. Sit down or be removed from this court immediately." Neither of them moved. The officers didn't wait for permission. As they approached, I watched the men who once controlled my entire existence lose every ounce of composure, clawing for a version of reality that no longer belonged to them. Daniel's voice cracked. Helena. You can't let them take me. You're my sister. I stood slowly. And you stopped being my brother the day you forged my name. His mouth opened, but no words came. Only disbelief. Adrian looked at me then, not with anger, but something hollow. Did you ever love me at all? He asked quietly. I held his gaze. Yes. But you loved power more. He flinched as if I'd hit him. The officers led them both out, Daniel shouting, Adrian silent. Their footsteps echoed down the marble corridor until they faded completely. For a long time, the courtroom stayed still. Then, one by one, the spectators began to whisper. She took them both down. Her own family. How did she do it? I didn't hear the rest. I was too busy breathing for the first time in years. Harlan touched my shoulder gently. It's over. I shook my head. No. It's beginning. He smiled faintly. You really don't stop, do you? Not when they built everything on my silence. He exhaled, glancing toward the doorway. You know what comes next, right? Media, lawyers, board inquiries. You'll inherit more than wealth, you'll inherit the empire. I don't want the empire, I said quietly. I want to rebuild it. Later, when the courtroom emptied, I sat alone in the front row. The air smelled faintly of rain and old varnish. It felt strange, this quiet. I had imagined victory so many times, me standing triumphant, them on their knees. But now that it was real, I didn't feel triumph. I felt peaceful clarity, like walking through ashes after the fire has already burned everything worth destroying. My phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. They'll come for you next. Watch your back. I stared at it, then deleted it without hesitation. Fear no longer had a home in me. That evening, I met Harlan and Clara in his office to debrief. They were both exhausted but exhilarated, the adrenaline of victory still pulsing in their veins. Clara opened her laptop, showing me the latest reports. With Daniel and Adrian under arrest, the investigation shifts to asset recovery. You'll need to sign to access the estate accounts officially. I nodded. And the company? Harlan smiled. You're now the legal CEO of Mercer Holdings. The board has already received notice. The words felt surreal. So that's it? I own everything? Everything they thought you'd never have, he said. I let out a shaky laugh. They used to tell me I couldn't handle numbers. That I'd ruin the family business if I ever touched it. Harlan leaned forward. And now? Now, I said, I'll decide who deserves to stay. For a moment, the three of us sat in silence, the weight of the day settling over us. Then Clara said softly, you know, Helena, what you did today, it wasn't just revenge. It was reclamation. I nodded. Revenge is temporary. Justice lasts longer. She smiled. Then justice has your signature now. Later, alone again, I drove back to the house I hadn't seen since the day my brother threw me out. The estate gates were still there, tall and black, the family crest gleaming faintly under the moonlight. When the guard saw my name on the list, he opened the gates without a word. The gravel crunched under my tires, the same sound from childhood drives that used to make me nervous. I parked, stepped out, and stood before the house. It looked smaller than I remembered. I walked through the door, my footsteps echoing on the marble. The smell of old cedar and polished silver filled the halls. My father's portrait still hung above the staircase, watching. For years, I'd avoided his eyes in that painting, afraid of the judgment there. But tonight, I met his stare head-on. You built this place on fear, I said softly. I'll rebuild it on truth. My voice didn't shake. I walked to the study, his study, and sat in his old leather chair. The view from the window showed the vineyard stretching out beneath a silver sky, endless rows of vines that once belonged to him, then Daniel, and now, me. I reached into my bag, pulled out the recorder, and pressed play one last time. Daniel's voice filled the room. She's nobody. A bitter ex-wife with a victim complex. I let it play until the end, then hit delete. Not anymore, I whispered. As I leaned back, exhaustion finally washed over me, deep, heavy, cleansing. The kind that follows not pain, but closure. I closed my eyes, and for the first time since my wedding, I felt the quiet hum of safety. Tomorrow, I would begin again, not as the disowned daughter or the humiliated wife, but as the rightful heir of everything they thought I wasn't strong enough to claim. The world had underestimated me for the last time. Just before dawn, my phone buzzed again. A text, this one from Clara. You need to see this. Someone's contesting the trust. It's not Daniel or Adrian. It's your mother. I stared at the message, my heart tightening once more. So the final battle wasn't over. When Clara's message came through, I was still sitting in my father's study, the first hint of dawn bleeding through the curtains. For a long time, I just stared at the words on the screen. Someone's contesting the trust. It's your mother. I read it 3 times before I laughed, softly at first, then bitterly. Of course it was her. The woman who had taught me how to swallow silence now wanted to bite the hand that finally fed her truth. I called Clara immediately. Tell me everything. Her voice crackled through the line. She's filed an emergency petition to delay the estate transfer. Claims your father's addendum was coerced, that he was mentally unfit when he signed it. I exhaled slowly. Convenient timing. She's also citing her spousal rights. Says she should have partial claim to any redistribution. Of course. My mother had never wanted wealth, she wanted control disguised as devotion. I could almost hear her rehearsing her lines. I'm only doing this to protect the family. Clara, I said, set up a meeting. I'll talk to her myself. Clara hesitated. You sure? She's lawyered up already. I'm sure, I said. She taught me how to fight dirty. She deserves to see what she created. We met that evening at her townhouse, the same one she bought after my father's death. The air smelled faintly of lilacs and something sharper, like perfume layered over guilt. She opened the door herself, perfectly composed, pearls at her neck, lipstick unbothered by age. Helena, she said coolly. I didn't expect you to come so soon. You didn't think I'd hide, did you? Her lips curved. You always were dramatic. Come in. I stepped inside. The house was immaculate, sterile. It didn't feel like a home, more like a museum of reputation. We sat in the living room. She poured tea, every motion precise, controlled. I hear you've been busy, she said. Making a spectacle. I've been cleaning your mess, I replied. Her eyebrow arched. My mess? You married power and pretended it was love. You raised Daniel to believe empathy was weakness. You let my father destroy me because it was easier than admitting he was wrong. She stirred her tea slowly. You always rewrite history to make yourself the victim. I smiled faintly. Funny. That's what Daniel said before they cuffed him. The sound of the spoon hitting porcelain echoed between us. Her voice dropped. You think you've won something, don't you? You think you're better than us because you have money now. I don't think, I said. I know. Her eyes narrowed, but her smile didn't fade. You'll learn, Helena. Wealth doesn't free women, it cages them in prettier rooms. I've lived in worse cages, I said. She leaned forward. You have no idea what your father went through to keep this family standing. Do you think he respected you? That addendum was a curse, not a gift. He left you everything because he knew it would destroy you. I laughed quietly. Then you should have destroyed me when you had the chance. Her composure cracked for the first time. You're playing with things you don't understand. There are men, powerful men, who won't let this rest. Then let them come, I said. I've already outlived the powerful men in my life. Her hands trembled slightly as she set the cup down. You've changed. No, I said softly. You just never believed I could. We sat in silence for a moment. Then I pulled a small folder from my bag and placed it on the table between us. You might want to see this. She hesitated before opening it. Inside were bank statements, her name listed as a recipient of monthly payments from Daniel's corporate accounts. Her face paled. Where did you get these? From the same files that put Daniel and Adrian in custody. Turns out, you weren't just a bystander. You were paid. Regularly. For silence. That's not true, she snapped. He gave me that money for living expenses. Then why were the transfers hidden under a dummy company? She froze. I leaned back. You knew. Maybe not everything, but enough. And now you're trying to rewrite your role again. But the court doesn't care about your performance anymore, Mother. It only cares about evidence. Her eyes glistened with something between fury and shame. You would destroy me to save yourself? I met her gaze. You destroyed me first. Her mask finally slipped. The voice that came next wasn't the polished matriarch's, it was the brittle, frightened one beneath. I did what I had to, she whispered. Your father, he was cruel. He told me if I didn't keep you in line, he'd cut me off. He said you were unstable, dangerous. And you believed him. I was scared, she shouted. You don't know what it's like living in a house built on fear. You think you suffered? I was married to him. Her words trembled, sharp as glass. For a moment, I saw not the mother who'd shamed me, but the woman she had once been before she learned to weaponize obedience. I spoke quietly. Then you should understand why I'm ending it. She looked away, tears streaking through her mascara. They'll destroy you too. I stood. Let them try. As I walked to the door, she called after me. Helena. I turned. If I withdraw my petition, will you leave me out of this? I studied her for a long moment. If you do it quietly, yes. But if you fight me, I'll make your name the headline. Her chin lifted weakly. You've become your father. No, I said, my voice steady. I became what he feared most, a woman who can't be silenced. And then I left. Outside, the night air hit cold against my face. The street was quiet, the city humming somewhere in the distance. I pulled out my phone and called Harlan. She's done, I said. You're sure? Yes. But she's scared. That's better than guilty, it means she'll fold. Good, he said. Because the press just got wind of the inheritance transfer. Tomorrow, you'll wake up to headlines. I'm ready, I said. You always were, he replied, and hung up. I walked for a while, through streets washed in rainlight, feeling the ache of release spreading through me. For years, my family had been the cage I kept trying to decorate. Now it was rubble behind me. But somewhere beneath the victory, I felt something unexpected, grief. Not for them, but for the version of me that still wanted them to love her. That version was gone. I stopped at a corner cafe, ordered tea, and sat by the window, watching the city breathe. For the first time, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt earned. My phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Clara or Harlan. It was a number I didn't recognize. This isn't over. Check your father's safe. There's something he didn't tell anyone. I stared at the message, the words pulsing on the screen like a heartbeat. The past, it seemed, still had one more secret to give. By the time I reached the Mercer estate, the sky had turned the color of steel, muted, heavy, waiting to break. The message replayed in my mind with every turn of the wheel. Check your father's safe. There's something he didn't tell anyone. The words pulsed like a threat or a promise. Maybe both. The house was silent when I stepped inside, but not peacefully so. It was the silence of history holding its breath. Every portrait on the walls seemed to watch me, every echo a reminder that this place had never been mine until now. I made my way to the study. The scent of old leather and dust lingered, familiar and suffocating. I walked to the far wall where the family crest hung, a brass lion framed in oak. My father's symbol of dominance. Behind it, I remembered, was the safe. The crest came off easily, and the keypad blinked awake beneath it. The numbers were faintly worn from years of use. I stared at them for a moment, unsure of what code he would have used. A birthday? His wedding anniversary? Then I realized, no. My father was far too vain for sentiment. He would use something that made him feel powerful. I typed 1984, the year he founded the company. The lock clicked open. Inside, neatly stacked, were folders bound in ribbon, a small leather notebook, and one thin black envelope marked private, HM only. My initials. For a moment, I just stared at it, my throat tightening. The same man who had disowned me had left something with my name on it. I sat at his desk, laid the envelope in front of me, and opened it. Inside was a single handwritten letter and a USB drive. The handwriting was unmistakably his, sharp, angled, controlled. Helena. If you are reading this, it means the house has fallen to you. I never expected Daniel to be strong enough to lead, but I underestimated just how far he would go. If he has done what I feared, then everything I built is now poisoned. You were the only one I couldn't control. That was your greatest flaw, and your greatest strength. I despised it then. I admire it now. The drive enclosed contains files your brother and husband never found. They concern investors who funded the estate in its early days, people who made promises that should never have existed. If you plan to rebuild, know this, our fortune was born on corruption. Decide whether to cleanse it or protect it. Either way, you will inherit the war I started. Do better than I did. Or burn it all. Edward Mercer. I read the letter twice before I realized I was shaking. Do better than I did. Or burn it all. Those were not words from a father, they were confessions from a man who had finally understood the monster he'd become. I looked at the USB drive, small and ordinary, yet heavy with whatever truth he had left behind. My instinct was to plug it in immediately, but something stopped me. For once, I wasn't sure if I wanted to know. When I finally connected it to my laptop, the folder opened to reveal dozens of encrypted files labeled by year. 1983, 1984, 1985, all the way through the early 2000s. Clara would know what to do with them. But before calling her, I noticed one file that wasn't encrypted. It was titled simply, "For my daughter." My pulse quickened as I opened it. A video began to play. My father sat at his desk, older than I remembered him, his once black hair streaked with silver. His voice was lower, raspier. "Helena," he said, looking directly into the camera. "If this reaches you, I'm already gone. You'll have learned the truth by now, about Daniel, about the business, about me." He paused, folding his hands. "You weren't wrong to fight. You were wrong to leave. You should have stayed and taken it from me while I was still alive. You were always the only one who could." I leaned back, my chest tight. He smiled faintly, a tired, bitter smile. "I raised sons to inherit my power, but I raised you to survive it. There's a difference. Daniel will never forgive me for choosing you, even after death. Let him try to destroy you. He'll only dig deeper into the hole I left him." The screen flickered for a moment, then steadied. Inside this drive are the real ledgers, the ones that prove how this family became rich. If you release them, you'll ruin us. But maybe you'll free yourself. Either way, Helena, make it mean something. The video ended. I sat there in the glow of the laptop screen, the sound of my father's voice echoing in the room like a ghost that refused to die. When I called Clara, my voice was steady again. "I found something in the safe." "What kind of something?" "Everything," I said. He left me a confession. Within an hour, she and Harlan were at the estate. We watched the video together in silence. When it ended, Harlan leaned back, rubbing his temple. Well, he said finally, that explains why Daniel was always paranoid about audits. Clara shook her head. This isn't just corporate corruption. These documents link to offshore financiers, bribery, even political donations. If this leaks, Helena, it could start investigations across multiple sectors. I looked down at the drive. So my father didn't just build an empire, he built a machine. Harlan met my eyes. And now you hold the key to shut it down, or restart it. For a moment, the three of us sat in the stillness of the study, the enormity of choice settling like dust around us. Whatever you decide, Clara said gently, you have to be ready for the fallout. This isn't just family anymore. This is legacy. Legacy. The word felt poisoned and sacred all at once. I stood, walking to the window where dawn had fully broken over the vineyard. The rows of vines glistened, wet and endless, roots tangled deep in soil that had been fertilized by generations of lies. I'll make my decision after the verdict, I said quietly. First, they answer for what they've done. Then I'll decide whether to bury his empire or resurrect it on my own terms. Harlan nodded. Just remember what he said, do better, or burn it all. I intend to do both, I said. That night, after they left, I returned to the study alone. I replaced the letter in the safe but kept the USB drive with me. As I locked the door behind me, I caught my reflection in the glass of the old family portrait. For a moment, I thought I saw movement, my father's eyes flickering with something almost approving. But then I realized it wasn't his gaze I was seeing. It was mine. The next morning, Harlan called. His tone was grim. Helena, something's happened. Daniel's been released on bail. I froze. What? He's already making statements to the press. He's saying you've forged the documents, that you've stolen the family empire. My stomach turned cold. So he wants another war. Harlan sighed. He's already started one. By the time I saw the headlines, the damage had already begun. Mercer heiress under fire, forged inheritance scandal? Brother alleges fraud in family fortune transfer. Daniel's face filled every article, his hand raised mid-speech, the perfect image of a righteous man reclaiming what was stolen. The irony was nauseating. I sat in my office at Mercer Holdings, the morning sun bleeding through the glass walls. On my desk lay the newspaper, my phone buzzing nonstop with calls from journalists, board members, vultures in suits. Harlan paced by the window, reading the statements aloud from his tablet. He's claiming you manipulated evidence, Helena. Says you bribed a witness, Tessa Lang. He's filed for injunction to freeze the estate transfer again. I clenched my jaw. He's not afraid of prison because he's fighting in the only court that ever mattered to him, public opinion. Clara entered, phone in hand. There's more. He's holding a press conference in an hour. He's threatening to release private recordings that prove you planned this years ago. I turned to her sharply. Recordings? She nodded grimly. Fabricated, most likely. He's desperate. But if he controls the narrative, he could sway the investigation. Harlan sighed. We can't chase him with anger. We need a counter. Calm, strategic, undeniable. I stood, the calm settling over me like armor. Then we'll give him something undeniable. The press conference was held at the downtown Hilton, swarming with cameras and microphones. I didn't need to be there to imagine it, Daniel in his tailored suit, the performative grief, the wounded pride. Clara streamed it live on her phone from my office. Daniel stood before a wall of reporters, his voice sharp and persuasive. My sister has misrepresented this family's legacy. My father's documents were altered posthumously. I trusted her, and she repaid that trust with deceit. She is not the rightful heir, she is the thief of our name. The reporters shouted questions. Mr. Mercer, what about your prior arrest? Did you or your company falsify accounts? He shook his head solemnly. Those allegations were fabricated. I am cooperating fully. I want transparency, for my family and our investors. I almost admired his performance. He'd always been our father's perfect creation, charming, credible, cold. Until Clara whispered, "Wait." On screen, a journalist asked, "What about the recordings, Mr. Mercer? Can we hear them?" Daniel smiled. "Of course." He pressed a button on the podium. The speakers hissed to life. And then, my voice filled the room. "We'll destroy him, Harlan. I'll make sure Daniel never breathes free air again." The clip was crisp, damning, perfectly cut. I froze. Clara's face went pale. "That's edited audio." Harlan swore under his breath. "He's using manipulated recordings, AI spliced. We can disprove it, but it'll take time." "Time I don't have," I said quietly. He turned to me. "Don't react. Don't give him the satisfaction." But I was already walking to the window, my reflection sharp against the skyline. "No. It's time the world saw the real story." 2 hours later, I stood on the same stage where he had lied. The cameras were still set up, the reporters buzzing with new hunger. Harlan tried to stop me, but I had already called the press myself. When I walked out, the murmurs hushed. "Mrs. Mercer," someone called, "how do you respond to your brother's accusations?" I stepped up to the podium, looked straight into the cameras, and spoke with the calm of a woman who no longer needed to defend herself. "My brother is correct about one thing," I said. "This family has been living in deception for decades. But not mine. His." I held up the USB drive my father had left me. Inside this drive are the original ledgers of the Mercer estate, records that prove not only my father's corruption, but my brother's continuation of it. I could have kept them hidden. I didn't. "I'm submitting them to the federal investigation today." Gasps rippled through the crowd. "And the recordings he played?" I continued. "Fabricated. My legal team has already filed an injunction for digital forensics. I have nothing to hide. My father taught me that silence is complicity, and I won't be complicit anymore." I leaned closer to the microphones. "If my family's legacy must burn for the truth to stand, then let it burn." The flash of cameras was blinding. For a moment, the room went utterly silent, then erupted with questions. "Mrs. Mercer, are you admitting your father was corrupt?" "Yes." "Are you giving up the company?" "No. I'm rebuilding it." "Do you think your brother will retaliate?" I smiled faintly. "He already has. And I'm still standing." Back in the car, Harlan was shaking his head, half in disbelief, half in awe. "You just detonated a grenade in public and walked away from the blast." I stared out the window. Truth is only dangerous when it's buried. Clara checked her phone. The recording analysts are already verifying Daniel's clip. Once it's confirmed fake, he'll be charged with obstruction. "Good," I said quietly. "Let him feel what it's like to be doubted." That night, I returned to the estate. Rain hammered against the windows, thunder low and distant. I stood in the study, my father's letter still on the desk. "Do better than I did. Or burn it all." I whispered into the storm, "I'm doing both." Then I called Harlan. "File the release." "You're sure?" "Yes. Full disclosure. Every ledger, every offshore account, every name. If my father built this empire on rot, then let the world see the roots." There was silence on the other end. Then Harlan said, "Once this goes out, there's no going back." "I know," I said. "That's the point." By midnight, the files were in the hands of investigators and journalists. By dawn, the story broke. Mercer Empire implodes, heiress exposes generational fraud. Daniel Mercer under federal investigation, evidence confirms fabrication of recordings. I watched the news unfold with a calm I hadn't known in years. The machine my father built, the one my brother worshipped, was collapsing, one headline at a time. And in its ashes, I felt something that wasn't guilt or victory. It was freedom. Later that morning, Clara called. You did it, Helena. The board voted. They're dissolving Mercer Holdings. You're free of it. I smiled faintly. Free. Finally. But as I hung up, I looked again at the vineyard outside. The land was quiet, mist curling over the rows of vines. It didn't look ruined. It looked reborn. For the first time, the silence around me wasn't suffocating. It was sacred. The past was gone. The truth was mine. That night, as I locked up the study, my phone buzzed with a final message, no number, no signature. You think you ended it. But the drive wasn't the only copy. The screen went black. I exhaled slowly, a faint smile curling at my lips. Then let them come, I whispered. I have nothing left to hide. The courthouse looked different that morning, less like a monument to power, more like a stage where all masks were finally stripped away. Cameras lined the steps, reporters shouting questions into the winter air. But I didn't flinch. I had walked through storms far worse than flashbulbs and microphones. When I entered, the familiar scent of varnish and nerves filled the hall. My heels echoed on the marble, the sound steady, deliberate, final. The hearing wasn't about inheritance this time. It was about truth. About whether the empire I'd burned down would be written in history as corruption or courage. Daniel was already there, sitting beside his new lawyer, older, grayer, desperate. He didn't look at me when I walked in, but I could feel his resentment radiating across the room like static. My mother sat in the back row again, small and silent, her pearls replaced by a thin gold cross, as if repentance could be worn like jewelry. Adrian wasn't present. He was still in custody, awaiting trial. He'd tried to strike a deal, but the prosecutors had found too much. His empire, like Daniel's, was now dust. When the judge entered, the room rose. The gavel struck once, echoing like a heartbeat. Be seated, she said. This court will now issue its final ruling in the matter of Mercer versus Mercer and the related charges of financial fraud, perjury, and defamation. The air was so thick with tension I could hear someone's breath catch in the second row. The judge looked down at her notes, then up at me. Mrs. Helena Mercer, you have cooperated fully with federal investigations and provided documentation crucial to uncovering systemic fraud within Mercer Holdings. Your actions, while unconventional, are recognized by this court as acts of integrity. My fingers gripped the edge of the table. She turned to Daniel. Mr. Daniel Mercer, you are found guilty of falsifying documents, fabricating evidence, and conspiracy to defraud both the estate and its stakeholders. You are sentenced to 12 years federal imprisonment with no possibility of parole for the first 7. Daniel's mouth opened, but no sound came. His lawyer whispered something frantic, but it was over. The gavel came down again, clean, merciless. Order, the judge said. I didn't look away. I wanted him to see me watching him the way he used to watch me, when I begged him for fairness, when I cried and he smiled. Now he couldn't even meet my eyes. The judge continued, her tone unwavering. Furthermore, all disputed assets of the Mercer estate are to be consolidated under the rightful heir, Mrs. Helena Mercer, as designated by the authenticated addendum signed by Edward Mercer. The trust is hereby reinstated under her sole authority. There it was. Final. Irrevocable. The moment that would be remembered in every whisper about our family for generations. The gavel struck again. This court is adjourned. The noise that followed was chaos, journalists rushing forward, cameras flashing, the bailiff shouting for order. But I stayed still, breathing, letting the sound wash over me like waves against stone. It was done. Daniel was led away in handcuffs. As he passed me, he muttered under his breath, "You think this makes you clean?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The silence between us said everything, his world collapsing, mine beginning. My mother rose slowly, her face unreadable. For a moment, I thought she would leave without a word. But she walked toward me, her heels unsteady, and whispered, "You've shamed this family." I met her gaze. No, Mother. I ended its shame. She looked like she might slap me, but instead she just shook her head and walked out. The sound of the courtroom doors closing behind her felt like the final page of a long, cruel book. Outside, the air was cold and bright. Reporters crowded the steps, shouting my name. "Mrs. Mercer, do you have any comment? What will happen to the estate now? Do you plan to rebuild Mercer Holdings?" I stopped at the top of the stairs, the courthouse behind me, the world in front. "My comment," I said, my voice cutting through the noise, "is simple. The truth isn't an attack, it's a reckoning. And the Mercer name will no longer mean corruption. It will mean survival." They shouted more questions, but I was already walking away. Harlan caught up to me by the car, his expression both relieved and exhausted. "You did it. Completely. It's over." I smiled faintly. "Nothing's ever really over, Harlan. But yes. It's finished enough." That night, the estate was quiet again. The press had retreated, the gates locked, the air still. I walked through each room, the weight of the verdict sinking in. The ghosts here were quieter now, no longer angry, just tired. In the study, the fire crackled softly. On the desk sat my father's old letter, the ink faded but still legible. "Do better than I did. Or burn it all." I whispered to the empty room, "I did both, Dad. And I'm still standing." I poured myself a glass of the vineyard's last vintage, the wine Daniel once said I wasn't refined enough to appreciate, and raised it toward his portrait. "To the end of fear," I said. The flames flickered against the glass, turning everything gold. Later, I went out to the vineyard. The air smelled of wet earth and smoke. The vines were bare, their roots deep, stubborn, alive. I walked between the rows, my boots sinking into the soil that had once belonged to everyone but me. Now it was mine. All of it. Not because of blood, or law, or vengeance. But because I had endured. Because I had learned that inheritance isn't about what's given, it's about what you refuse to surrender. And I had refused everything they tried to take. As I reached the far end of the vineyard, my phone buzzed, one message, no name. "You won the verdict. But you're not free until you know what he hid offshore." Attached was a single file, Mercer_legacy_confidential.zip. I stared at it under the moonlight, the soft wind brushing against my skin. It looked like the past had one last move left to play. The message arrived like a whisper from a ghost, one I wasn't sure I still feared or pitied. "You won the verdict. But you're not free until you know what he hid offshore." The attached file, Mercer_legacy_confidential.zip, blinked on my phone screen as if alive, daring me to open it. I stood beneath the skeletal vines, the winter wind tugging at my coat, and felt that old, familiar pulse of dread. My father had left so many secrets buried under the illusion of legacy. Every time I thought I'd uncovered the last of them, another hand reached up from the grave. I walked back to the house. The study lights were still on, the fire reduced to embers. The air smelled faintly of smoke and age, like a confession waiting too long to be heard. I sat at his desk, opened my laptop, and loaded the file. The password prompt appeared instantly. Of course. He wouldn't make it easy. I tried Mercer, Helena, 1984. Nothing. Then I stared at the letter again, the one that had haunted me for weeks. The line came back to me, "Do better than I did. Or burn it all." I typed "burn it all." The file unlocked. Inside were documents, thousands of them. Scanned contracts, offshore registration records, names I didn't recognize. But one folder caught my eye, Air Protocol. I opened it. The first document was titled Contingency Plan, 1998. My father's writing filled the margins in red ink. In the event of exposure or federal inquiry, divert remaining assets to proxy account number 4728 under alias A. Lane. Assets to be protected by trust until beneficiary's majority age. If compromised, destroy physical backups. I frowned. A. Lane? Scrolling further, I found a notarized statement, stamped and dated 25 years ago. The beneficiary of proxy account 4728 shall be Alexandra Lane Mercer, born 1998, legal guardian Margaret Lane. My breath caught. Alexandra Lane Mercer. I didn't have a sister. At least, I'd never been told I did. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the next files, birth records, school transcripts, wire transfers. It was all there. Every year, regular deposits. Quiet, hidden. A life funded in secrecy. And then a photograph. A young woman, maybe 25 now. Brown hair, green eyes. Something about her face, the sharpness of her jaw, the way she held her posture, it was like looking at a version of myself I didn't recognize. The caption beneath it read: Alexandra Mercer, beneficiary of secondary estate holdings. Location, Geneva. I leaned back in the chair, my pulse hammering. My father had another heir. Another daughter. All these years, while I was fighting ghosts, there had been someone else living freely off a fortune I didn't know existed. I called Harlan immediately. You need to get to the estate. Now. He arrived within the hour, his face still pale from exhaustion. I turned the laptop toward him, the documents glowing in the dim light. He scrolled, lips tightening. My God. She's real? I asked. He nodded slowly. The paperwork's legitimate. Look, these transfers were routed through offshore trusts we never found. Your father used shell accounts to hide her existence. Why? Maybe guilt, Harlan said. Or insurance. He knew Daniel's greed would eat him alive. Maybe he wanted someone untouched by it. I laughed bitterly. Untouched? He hid her like a secret shame. Clara joined us a few minutes later, her eyes wide as she scanned the files. Helena, if this gets out, the media will swarm again. Another heir changes everything, especially one your father funded. I looked at the photograph again. She's my blood, Clara. And she's been living under his protection this whole time. Do you want to find her? I hesitated. The rational part of me wanted to close the file, to let her remain a shadow. But the woman I'd become, the one who'd clawed through lies and courts and betrayal, couldn't leave a mystery like this unfinished. Yes, I said. I need to know who she is, and why he hid her from me. 2 days later, I sat in a small airport lounge in Geneva. Snow drifted against the windows, soft and relentless. Harlan had arranged the meeting quietly, through a lawyer listed in one of the documents. When the door opened, I saw her. Alexandra Lane Mercer. She looked younger than me by almost 15 years. But the resemblance was undeniable, the same dark eyes, the same cautious way of holding her shoulders as if expecting the world to collapse at any moment. Helena, she said softly. Her accent was faintly European, but the name rolled off her tongue like something she'd practiced saying for years. Yes, I said. You must be Alexandra. She smiled nervously. You can call me Lex. We sat across from each other. The silence between us was strange, not hostile, but fragile, like glass that could shatter if I breathed too hard. Did you know about me? I asked. She shook her head. Not until he died. My mother told me when I turned 21. She said he'd promised to bring me into the family someday, but then, he didn't. Did he ever visit you? Once, she said. When I was 12. He brought me a necklace with the family crest. Said it would mean something one day. I didn't understand until now. I swallowed hard. He made you his backup plan. Her eyes softened. And he made you his heir. Maybe he was trying to fix what he broke. We talked for hours. About him, about Daniel, about the trial she'd watched from afar. Lex had been following everything, quietly, afraid. I thought you'd hate me, she said finally. I smiled faintly. How can I hate someone who never had a choice? She looked down. Then what happens now? I thought about it for a long time. The vineyard, the empire, the ashes I'd turned into soil. The trust gave me control over everything, but maybe control wasn't what I wanted anymore. "You'll come back with me," I said. "You'll see where it all began. And then we'll decide together what to do with it." Her eyes widened. "You'd share it?" "It's not about sharing," I said quietly. "It's about ending what he started, the lies, the power games, the rot." She nodded slowly. "Then I'm with you." When I left the lounge, the snow had stopped. The sky over Geneva was pale and clean, the kind of cold that clears everything it touches. For the first time, I felt no fear about the name Mercer. No anger, no grief. Just clarity. Maybe the legacy wasn't a curse after all. Maybe it was a test, to see who could finally stop running from the truth. And maybe, against all odds, I had just found the one person who could help me do it. As the car drove us toward the city, Lex handed me a folded note she said her mother had kept hidden for years. It was in my father's handwriting. "If they ever meet, tell Helena the vineyard was never hers, it was always theirs." I looked at Lex. She met my gaze, smiling faintly. "Looks like we both inherited more than money." The plane touched down just after sunset. Through the window, the vineyard stretched like a dark ocean, rows of vines shimmering in moonlight. It looked both endless and finite, like something reborn after being set on fire. Lex sat beside me, her face pressed to the glass, eyes wide in quiet wonder. I envied her innocence. She was seeing the Mercer estate for the first time. I was seeing it for the last time as the battlefield it had always been. When we stepped out onto the tarmac, the cold air carried the scent of soil and smoke. A storm had passed earlier, the ground glistened under the runway lights. "This is it?" Lex asked softly. "This," I said, "is where everything began and everything ended." We rode in silence through the long drive up to the estate. The iron gates opened at my signal, creaking like old bones. For the first time, they opened for me, not for my father, not for Daniel, not for anyone else. As we reached the main house, Lex stared up at its towering facade. "It's beautiful," she whispered. I smiled faintly. "It's haunted." Inside, the warmth of the fire met us like an old memory. I guided her through the rooms, each one heavy with history. "This was the drawing room," I said. "They used to host dinners here for people who pretended to be their friends." She traced her fingers across the piano. "Did you ever play?" "No. My father said music was a distraction." He was wrong. "He was wrong about a lot of things," I said. When we reached the study, Lex stopped at the portrait above the fireplace. "That's him?" "Yes. Edward Mercer. The man who built everything and destroyed everything else in the process." She studied it for a long time. "He looks like he'd hate being forgotten." I laughed quietly. "He would. That's why we're going to rewrite his story." Lex turned toward me, her expression serious. "You mean, keep the company?" "No," I said. "We're going to start something new. The land stays. The vineyards, the estate, but Mercer Holdings is finished. It dies with his lies." Her brows furrowed. "But what about the inheritance? The name?" "The name isn't wealth, Lex. It's weight. You'll understand." The next morning, we met with Harlan and Clara in the sunroom overlooking the hills. "So this is her," Harlan said, shaking Lex's hand. "You really do have your father's eyes." "Unfortunate, isn't it?" she replied, smiling shyly. Harlan chuckled. "She's got your tongue, too, Helena." I sipped my coffee, letting them speak, my mind already moving ahead. "Harlan," I said finally, "I want the trust rewritten." He blinked. "Rewritten? You just want it." "I don't want to own it," I said. "I want to transform it." He frowned. "Into what?" "Into a foundation. The Mercer Renewal Fund. It'll support women who've been silenced by families, marriages, or money. Everything this name once crushed, it'll now rebuild." Clara's eyes lit up. Helena, that's brilliant. Lex looked at me, stunned. You'd give it away? I smiled softly. I already took back everything that mattered, myself. The rest belongs to something bigger. By afternoon, the press was already outside the gates again, waiting for the statement Harlan had teased the night before. I walked out with Lex at my side, cameras flashing, reporters shouting. Mrs. Mercer. Is it true you've discovered another heir? Yes, I said, my voice clear, steady. My father left behind more than one child. He left behind damage that took both of us to repair. Gasps. A few murmurs. Are you two fighting for control? Someone called out. I smiled. No. We're building something new together. Flashes exploded. The questions multiplied, but I kept speaking. The Mercer legacy ends today as a symbol of greed and silence. From this moment forward, the estate will serve the Renewal Fund, an organization for women rebuilding their lives after betrayal, injustice, or loss. This vineyard once grew under corruption. Now, it will grow under truth. Lex stood beside me, her chin lifted. We inherit not the sins of our fathers, but the chance to do better, she said quietly. Her words silenced the crowd. I felt something shift then, not just in the people before me, but in myself. For the first time I wasn't defending or fighting. I was leading. That night, the house was filled with laughter for the first time in decades. Staff who had stayed through the turmoil toasted quietly in the kitchen. Clara and Harlan shared wine on the terrace. Lex sat at the piano, playing something soft and hopeful. I stood by the window, watching the vineyard lights shimmer across the hills. You really meant it, Harlan said, coming to stand beside me. You're giving it all away. I nodded. Everything I inherited was poisoned. I'm tired of holding ghosts. He smiled faintly. And what about the offshore accounts? The last file? The message that said you weren't free yet? I looked out over the dark rows of vines. I opened it. There's nothing left to hide. The rest was just noise from the past trying to stay alive. You're sure? I turned to him, my voice quiet but sure. Yes. For the first time, I am. Later, when everyone had gone to bed, I walked alone through the vineyard. The moon hung low, bright and unblinking. The earth smelled clean. I thought about my father, my brother, Adrian, even my mother. Each of them had wanted control. Each of them had fallen to it. I had spent my entire life trying to earn their approval, then their punishment, then their respect. In the end, I didn't need any of it. All I ever needed was the truth, and the courage to live after it. At the far end of the vineyard, I found the old storage barn where my father once kept the first barrels of wine. The door creaked open. Inside, dust floated in thin beams of moonlight. I set down a single bottle on the floor, the last one from his original harvest, sealed in 1984. The same year the empire began. I took out a match, struck it, and lit the folded corner of his letter. The flames curled upward, soft and orange. As the paper burned, I whispered, I forgive you. Then I let the match fall. The fire spread slowly, eating the old wood, licking the edges of the past. I stood there until it glowed bright enough to see the world differently. When the fire department came, I told them calmly, it was intentional. The past needed to burn. Lex met me outside, her hair glowing in the firelight. You really let it go, she said softly. Yes, I whispered. All of it. She smiled, tears glistening. Then what happens now? I looked toward the hills, where dawn was beginning to break, turning the ashes into gold. Now, I said, we plant again. The fire was out by sunrise. The vineyard stood half scorched, half alive, just like me. The reporters called it the purge of the Mercers. They were right. I built something new from the ruins, the Renewal Fund, the vineyard reborn, and a name finally clean. Sometimes I walk past the charred barn and think of my father's letter, do better. Or burn it all? I did both. And from the ashes, something stronger grew. Tell me, if everything you ever loved was built on lies, would you burn it too? If you would have fought like me, share your story. Subscribe.